Well, 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 welly, welly, well, my brethren. I was going to do a Clockwork Orange start, but I can't remember how it went. Oh well. um, More truck driver, really. And I've got some good news actually, and that is that I won't just be doing truck driver. I'll have a bash of Tourist Bus Simulator, which is currently downloading. Do, do, do. Looks pretty good actually. It's 24.99 in the UK. I've given up on waiting for it to be on sale. It's just I don't think it's ever going to be on sale. It is a Series X game, so you have to play it on the Series X console. But oh, those reviews aren't good. They're not good at all, are they? But, well, we'll see. It's actually based on an island that I've seen from a neighbouring island in the Canary Islands. Um, Ventura, I think it's called, something like that. It's supposed to be a fairly accurate recreation of that island. Um, didn't look like much from where I was, the north tip of Lanzarote, but I mean, I don't know. People say it's a nice island. Yeah, it should be pretty cool actually. I really like the Canary Islands myself. I love that, but I love all things Spanish more or less, you know. Um, so that should be pretty cool to have a look at. But whilst that's downloading, hopefully it shouldn't take too long. I'll start the updates as well. And that's another good game. I need to have a look at that. Just in the sim mood at the moment. Um, I did buy a DLC for Truck and Driver, um, which is like the Heading North DLC. So that should be pretty good. Again, that was actually pretty much the same price as the game itself. Well, we'll see what it's like. You know, I'm putting the hours into it. When you think it's like, I don't know, cinema nowadays, like 10 and 15 quid for a movie, that's 2 hours. I mean, that's like, it's crazy, isn't it, really? Like, so if leisure time's worth about 10 or 15 pounds, well, yeah, £7 50 an hour, I think video games, if they give you 4 hours, you know, it pays for itself in that sense. Uh, I don't quite know how you get to the island. I presume it's the way that I was clicking. It wasn't open to me before. Well, I say the island, the north, but it looks like a little island in the north actually. So I don't know. We'll see what it is. Since I broke this mic, I'm never quite happy about the way it sits, to be honest. I'm quite happy about the way I'm sat. I feel like my left buttock's going to go numb again. Congratulations, you've received access to the new map, Mangefjell. You can travel between Kustenberg and Mangefjell by taking the ferry. You can take the ferry at any time after you completed the tutorial. Press go to Mangefjell from the pause menu and follow your sat nav to take the ferry up north. Okay, so whereabouts do we go exactly? It's the ferry. Oh, I'm really excited about this. Go to Mangefjell. Nothing happened. Wait, where's the tutorial then? Oh, 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 God. Got my new tyres on. Right. You can go to Mangefjell anytime. Oh, what am I driving now? Oh my god, I have not been upgrading my XP, have I? I'm a quest driver, aren't I presume? Doesn't seem like a lot of XP bonus, does it? Hasn't said how to go to Mangefjell. It did mention about. Let's have a look. Okay. Still not clear on what the hell I'm doing. Sven Nordland. Is it Oosterhaven that I need? There's a ferry there. Let's try check it. In fact, let's just go to that garage. Save time. Look, here's that ferry. Is this it? Is this it? Travel to Mangefjell. Oh wow. Okay. Cool. I'm excited. Is I'm excited. But I am. Oh well. Tired actually. What's this all about? Who am I typing to? Hello, Uncle. I've just arrived here in Mangefjell. That is great news. Welcome to Mangefjell. Make sure to show you around it. First things first, let me show you my garage. I'll send you the location. Thanks, that is very nice of you. Okay. There's another thing that I found out. Controls, stop and go braking, turn it on. Now I won't just keep stopping and entering reverse all the time. Now this snud thing is very... 1 second, because I've got to give my back a good itch. I don't know why. But I can't poke the fork up the snuddy, whatever it's called. Okay, Mangefjell. Right, finally. And there we go. We're all good. So there is a map here. Oh my god. It's a big place, isn't it? Must be good to go straight on ahead. This is a big place. I might just take the long way around actually. I presumably I can't take a trailer with me to Mangefjell, but that'd be interesting if I just took a trailer on a job and then saw what it was like, you know, try to join, see what happened. Good job there's a garage nearby because I've just driven into a post. Ooh, this is exciting. Look at this. It's a nice sea. It's a big coastal town. It's up here I wanted to take the long way around. Yeah, this looks nice. Okay, cool. It's big, like, it's the biggest sort of city town that I've seen so far to date. I mean, that Oosterhaven's pretty big, but you can't access it all. A lot of it's like blocked off, but this is pretty cool. I'll be peed off if the developers just made this free. Like, there was something else that they made free, hidden places or something, I don't know. Right, it's a little bit, it just feels a little bit laggy. That could be because I'm downloading games actually, thinking about it. That bus simulator. Wow, this is a big place. This is a big, big place, isn't it? Oh, there's a car park there on the right. Tuft of grass in the road, that was a bit odd. Just slam on the brakes there. Should we race him? Ah, it's alright, we can catch up. Yeah, here we go. Ooh, ooh, ooh. God, not doing that again. Got to do this, make a good first impression, so my uncle doesn't have to bail me out of jail. Oh, that was a different. That's strange. That was a view on top of the cab then. That view looks like it's on top of the cab. Don't know. Neck and neck. He's turned off. He's wimped out. Bloody hell, there's a lot of lights around here, isn't there? Should I know what I'll do is I'll take a route into the city. Just have a look around. Just drive through. Make a left down here. This looks nice, actually. It's a strange thing that it's a DLC and not just part of the game, really, because the game does all. I mean, even though I've not completed it, the game does strike me as being quite small, actually. But oh God, lots of crossings. What time is it? Oh, it's getting all dark, isn't it? A bit fed up of being in the dark. You can't really see places that much. Well, this is nice, isn't it? Look at this big square as well. Big town square over there. Yeah, I think I'm going to be quite happy here, actually. I don't know what Heimsburger is, if that's a person or a town or what. Find out. What's that? Is that oh, that's a fuel court. Jesus, it's big, isn't it? What I'd have done is I'd have had, like I said, like I've said in the past, instead of RB being the wheel, RB would be a modifier where you can like select things, so it'd be RB plus X, then does something. But I'd have had LB. I'd have the view button bring you into the menu, straight into the map screen as well. LB would then be a wheel, but for changing views. So if you tap LB, it just cycles to the next view, and if you hold LB, it brings up a wheel of which you can then decide what view you want. I got lucky with those lights. Gotcha. Let's try out this because I changed that brake, so it should now. Yeah, it is braking normally. It's a big old place, this. It's quite cool. That little visor, that sun visor, is making the sky look very dark. Actually, the sun is going down. It's low. Look at those shadows. Okay. Whoa, Jesus Christ. He's in a hurry for somewhere. Now, really felt the need to sneeze then, but it's gone. Okay, presumably I'm in this compound to my right, actually, so let's just go all the way around. Now, that van that pulled out and went left, oh, you could have gone right at the end here. I was going to say it's like a one-way thing. So this is my uncle's place, is it? Over here. Right. So where am I going then? Ah, hey uncle, you have a nice place here. Thanks. You can always come back here to rest, fix your truck, or improve your truck. Are you ready for your first client? Here is a friend of mine. I'm sure you will like him. I will pin his location for you. Go to the aluminium factory. Is the garage any different here? Okay, is that not? That's not the garage then, I take it. Looks like it should be. Okay. So, I better check that there's a bed en route actually. Last thing I want to do is be. There is. Oh yeah, there is. There's one right at the end as well. Okay, well, I'm happy with this. It's a nice little DLC.
Hello you, this is the podcast of Inside Science from BBC Radio 4, first broadcast on the 23rd of March 2017. I'm Adam Rutherford. We've got exploding comets and erupting volcanoes and the neuroscience of people in Soho looking for a place called Lee Ho Fook. And we've got an extra long interview about the astonishing cognitive powers of octopuses. All hail Cthulhu, may he rise from his watery sleep. And yes, octopuses is the plural, not octopi, because it's an English word derived from the Greek. It's polypus in Latin, so please don't write in. Today we get willing guinea pigs to navigate a journey in the mean streets of Soho in London to see what our brains are doing when we're reading maps or listening to sat-nav. And while no one has any doubts that volcanoes are extremely dangerous forces of nature, one of our reporters was caught in an unusual and terrifying eruption last week. She's here to tell us the perils of reporting up close from the side of Etna as it goes off. And we feature the private life of the most extraordinary creatures and alien intelligence right here on Earth, the octopus.
I remember seeing an octopus a few years ago that had found a piece of clear perspex and had essentially built itself a kind of skylight, a sort of a clear roof-like structure over its den, which I thought showed, ingenuity and good taste.
Octopus mines and quality home furnishings, that's coming up in just a few minutes. But first, who can forget the excitement of the Rosetta mission to orbit and land on Comet 67P? Launched in 2004, Rosetta began orbiting this duck-shaped rocky snowball after a 10-year journey, and then deployed Philae, the lander, in 2014,
behind me now.
Which didn't go exactly according to plan. After a couple of big bounces, she still made it to the surface, a bit lopsided and in the shade, but still working. Now, all of that was an astounding achievement, but I guess we sometimes forget, amongst all that excitement, that these are scientific missions, not just spaceflight masterclasses. Well, the science is now coming in, and this week, some of the data about 67P is stepping out of the shade and into the sunlight. Rosetta took thousands of photos, not only mapping its entire surface, but its surface as it changed over 2 years, which it turns out was quite a lot, and it reveals intriguing insights into the origin of the solar system. Rami El-Mari is the lead author on a huge paper published this week, and I asked him what changes they saw during the Rosetta mission.
What we've seen is an active geological body, something that we never expected to see as far as a comet is concerned. We always had this classical idea of a comet being just a ball of dust and ice. And what we've seen with Rosetta is a complex, beautiful, almost magical geological world. So in terms of changes, we expected to see a range of changes occurring during perihelion. That means that period when it comes really close to the sun and all the activity starts, associated with jet activity and such. But we've seen sort of complex geological processes taking place. So we've witnessed cliffs collapsing, We've witnessed fragmentation of material. We witnessed materials being transported away from the comet and being redeposited somewhere else on the surface. We've seen fractures growing. So it's been really a suite of different changes.
And these are not geological in the sense that they're being generated by internal activity on the comet. Is it all to do with its position in relation to the sun, whether it's perihelion or a long way away?
Most of the changes that are occurring on the surface of the comet are driven by sunlight, and that is why most of the changes occur during perihelion, and that is the time when the comet is closest to the sun. It heats up the surface, and as a result, all the ices that we have very close to the surface end up heating up, and because we don't
Come
have
off
really
here.
atmospheric pressure, so what
Go to
happens is
bed.
that the ice will turn immediately into gas, and that can be sort of explosive at some point. That can create outbursts and also will drive a lot of the evolution that we see on the surface.
Oh,
But you have to take into account as well some internal forces. So
what's that
some of
barrier?
the fractures that we've witnessed growing are due to the comet, for example, spinning up during perihelion. So as it gained more speed, it developed internal stresses, almost tectonic-like, and that has resulted in the development of new fractures and other pre-existing fractures growing in size.
And the gravity of 67P is minuscule compared to the Earth. So I was wondering that when you see these collapses, not insignificant geological activity, why doesn't the matter just float away?
Well, it's not going to float away because you still have some sort of gravity there. Let's say if you were able to stand on the surface of the comet and actually witness that cliff collapse, you would actually have time to take your phone out of your pocket, make a video out of it, because everything would be going very slow. So that cliff collapse would take actually minutes to develop. You're sort of watching a slow motion video taking place.
That sounds sort of very dramatic, but in a very measured way. Now, tell us about what these results say about the sort of
Go to bed
broader
again.
implications of understanding the comet and understanding the origin of the comet.
Well, in terms of changes, all we've seen is spectacular, albeit localized changes.
7 a.m.
And what's that telling us is that most of the changes to the landscape of the comet should have happened when the comet just entered the inner solar
Able
system.
to see something this time.
And in the case of comet 67P, this happened in 1959. And one of the prime reasons why we chose comet
Oh, now it's
67P
misty.
was the fact that it had entered the solar system so late. So it would have given us the better chance to look at a relatively fresh comet. And we have Earth-based observations back to the 1980s that suggest that the activity since then hasn't changed so much. So we can assume that the first couple of orbits that we don't have much data about may have been even more spectacular. And that actually tells us something about how comets evolve. And another thing is that we want to really understand how the physical properties and the material strength of surface of comets evolve, not just from an academic point of view, but if at some point we have to face a possible comet impact to Earth, we need to understand these bodies as much as we can to have accurate defensive
20.
measures.
Some
It's
weird
not just
reason.
asteroids that can harm Earth, it might happen as well with comets.
Sure.
It's a very remote possibility, but always something that we should always be prepared for.
Okay, so 80,000 images. Presumably, you've got a lot more data to plow through. So, what are the outstanding questions? What's coming next?
I mean, I don't think there's anyone in the team that can claim having seen all 80,000 images. So, what we want to keep looking at is characterize the surface even more, look for more changes, and try to understand a little bit more the timing of all these events. But I think the next step forward that we would like to see is to have a sample return mission. And that means to have a mission that doesn't just go there, but it will go collect a sample from the comet and return that to Earth so we can study it even more accurately.
Rami El-Mari from the University of Colorado. Bouncing off a comet was not an easy task, but mercifully only dangerous to Philae and Rosetta, and all of that recorded at a safe distance of a few million miles. But if you ever question that reporting science is all done from the cosy confines of a studio in central London, have a listen to this.
Oh, I missed my turn off there.
That clip was filmed with BBC Science correspondent Rebecca Morell on the side of Mount Etna in Sicily as it started erupting at the end of last week. Becky is safe and sound and in the
This
studio
is
with me right now.
2017, this
Becky,
programme.
tell us what it was like.
Well, I'm very happy to be here to tell the tale because it was an extremely close call, really. So the irony was I was up there doing a piece on volcano monitoring and forecasting, and we were very excited that Etna was erupting, and we went to see a lava flow that had formed overnight. Now, this is normally an extremely safe activity. Tourists had been brought up there too, and you see this sort of magnificent flow of rocks very slowly oozing its way down the slope. But we'd been there for about 20 minutes, then all of a sudden there was a big cloud of steam sort of looming in the air, and it didn't look too menacing, but not long afterwards there was an explosion basically. And you know, lava is 1,000 degrees Celsius, it's throwing rocks up into the air, and we just all started to run. And I, knowing a little bit about volcanoes because of my job, I knew how dangerous it was, and I thought that was it. I thought we were all going to die. I fell over as we were running away from the scene, and all I could hear around me was thud, 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 thud of these rocks falling all around. My camerawoman filmed the whole thing. She was hit by a piece of burning lava. She's got a terrible burn on her back. My producer, Alison Francis, is covered in ridiculously huge bruises. But we got out okay, and the tourists who were there all got out okay. We were supremely lucky, actually.
And this particular type of eruption, it is characterised by steam at first, but then it's rocks and it is lava.
It was what's known as a phreatic explosion. And the day we were up there, even though Sicily is lovely and warm, it's cold up at the top of Etna, it's covered in snow. And under the lava flow that we were filming near, either some snow had kind of got tightly packed underneath, or it could have been that there was a fair amount of meltwater forming that day, and for whatever reason, instead of draining away, it got caught underneath the lava, and then some very rapid mixing started to happen between the 1,000 degrees Celsius lava and this very, very cold water. And that's what first of all caused this pressure to build up, and you had this steam plume happening first, and then once that released some pressure, then the whole sort of explosion chain started to happen. And it wasn't just one explosion. Over a series of minutes there were lots of them.
And you get almost no warning of this. You say it was 20 minutes from being up on the side of Etna to it going off, so really very difficult to predict.
You can predict big eruptions from craters, and those you do not want to be anywhere near, and you can do that by seeing how the ground moves just before an eruption. But in Etna terms, this was a small event, even though it seemed like a huge, terrifying event to us.
Etna is very active, isn't it?
One of the world's most active volcanoes, and also one of the world's most monitored volcanoes too. So every move that Etna makes is monitored. But this was a localised event that happened, and very unusual too. And I've actually spoken to some scientists since who were caught up in a similar event on a volcano in Russia. Again, very snowy there. Their explosion that they experienced was a much, much smaller one, their phreatic explosion that they saw. But they've watched our sort of experience with interest because it's very unusual for it to happen. You don't often get volcanoes which are covered in snow, and you don't often have people standing next to and recording these events.
Is there anything that can be learned scientifically from being so close to such a eruption?
Work out what this place is.
My camerawoman, Rachel Price, was just amazing. She filmed the whole thing. I have to say, work was the last thing on my mind when it actually happened. I wanted to get out.
There's a rather terrifying bit in the video where quite clearly either the camera's dropped or she goes to ground but gets up again. But
yeah, she falls twice, but she did capture the whole thing on camera.
We
are making it available to scientists who are interested in studying these things. I mean, there's actually a group out in the States where there's a sort of lava producing machine, and they put snow near it to see what happens. They want to get hold of the footage to use it. So if our experience can help scientists at all, we're really keen. And I'd love to get Rachel Price's name on a scientific paper. I mean, she certainly deserves it after the experience that she went through, and we all went through, in fact.
OK, thanks, Becky. BBC Science correspondent Rebecca Morell and camerawoman Rachel Price. The footage is on the website. It is genuinely frightening, so we're extremely happy that it got back safe and sound.
It's like an
airport. Do get in touch,
BBC
Inside Science at bbc.co.uk. Now, you might recall the famous study back in 2000 that experiment showed that black cab drivers have an enlarged part of their hippocampus in their brains as a result of learning the knowledge. Well, from that and many other studies before and since, we know that the hippocampus is essential for memory and spatial navigation and simply knowing where you are. But what's really going on in the brain when we're map reading and making decisions about whether to go left or right? A new study from a team at University College London has made detailed
big
maps of
mountain up
brain
there.
activity when negotiating the very windy streets
It's huge,
of
isn't
Soho.
it?
And
The
they
mountain
compared it
ranges.
to what our brains are up to when we're simply following the sat-nav. Hugo Spears is the man behind the scheme, and he successfully navigated the maze that is Broadcasting House to tell me how they set up this experiment.
So Olaf's test, let's have a look. Olaf Gunnarsson, it appears that you can deliver some aluminium cargo. Hi there. Are you the out-of-town trucker? Yes, I am. I just arrived off the last ferry of the Kustenberg. My uncle mentioned that you might have a job for me. There are too many requests coming in that include hauling freight. I don't have enough drivers. I could use the help. How about you show me what you can do? Deliver some aluminium sheets to Heinsberger port and we'll see what comes next. No problem. I'll have the job done in no time. Okay. Best of luck to you and be safe. Safe? It's just another load to deliver, right? Sound worried. Oh, yes it is. You are absolutely right. Just another load. Okay. Pick up the cargo at the aluminium factory. Now, where is the aluminium factory? I don't know why I'm whispering. Are we not at the aluminium factory? I'm going to have to do the old look around for a trailer. It's saying I'm a minute away from my destination, but it hasn't told me where the bloody destination is. It's a good job this isn't a timed job then, isn't it? Yeah, that's the... We can't fit down there. Those look like sheets of, well, girders of steel. Could be aluminium. Oh, it's over here on the left, okay. Wait, how do I get across the road then? It's all a bit complicated. that's weird. Okay. Attach the trailer to your truck. Ah, there we go. No, it's not a big trailer then, that's good news. Okay, and then Heimsburger Port, which is all the way back up there. Oh, right. Well, the port we came from. Um, I'm tempted to go the long way around. It's not a time job, but I'm tempted to go the long way around. Can I? I can't put that on the sat nav, but when I come out of here, I could turn right and then just take that sort of long coastal route and go around this town just to explore a bit, really. I think I'll do that.
So we took people who were naive to Soho, took them around on a really intensive taxi driver style training process, and then the next day scanned them. So half the time they're doing that kind of recalling the memory like a taxi driver. The other half the routes we gave them a sat nav, and it just told them at every corner, this is the way to go, take a left here. And so we're able then to look at the brain activity elicited in these two different conditions. And what we did in this new research was to then team up with the architects at University College London, the team in the Bartlett School of Architecture, who spend their time analysing the structure of city streets. And so they were able to find out for us which are the important streets and which are the less important streets. And so what this means effectively is one of the measures is for a given street, how many connections does it have? How many ways out of that street do you have?
And I suppose Soho is an important model for asking that question because it is a very higgledy-piggledy location.
You're exactly right. It's a really intense area of streets, and we picked it for that reason, that we could ask a lot of questions quickly during our MRI scan.
What do you see? I mean, where do you see the spikes in activity?
Right, exactly. So we were interested in, is there a bit of the brain that's interested in the amount of connections that a street has, both locally but also globally in the entire network. So some streets have, that are, in the center of the network, you can get to more streets quickly than others. So there's sort of a global connections versus local ones. And what we were able to see was that the posterior hippocampus, that bit that gets larger in London taxi drivers, its activity was specifically going up whenever people entered a street that had more local connections. So going into 7 dials with 7 streets would drive it with a lot of activity. But going into a dead end, its activity would actually decline and fall to a lower level. And so it's telling us what information is being processed by the hippocampus. It's one of the big mysteries. It's important that we know it's involved in navigation, but what is it actually doing? And we're showing here that precisely at the moment you enter a street, the posterior part is processing the number of possible routes, a bit like simulating what could I do in the future. And it's not clear people are actually consciously thinking that. It's quite a demanding thing to constantly be thinking about all the options, but it seems the hippocampus, its activity is being driven by that.
Well, I mean, that's completely fascinating. I mean, immediately I'm thinking of how chess computers work, where they actually map out exactly every possible outcome following the next move and then the next move. And you're saying, from your results, you're saying that humans do a similar sort of thing when they're trying to get from A to B.
That brings me on to the next result we found in the analysis. So the hippocampus is sort of like an automatic. It comes on whenever you enter a street. So long as you're navigating, the sat-nav condition turned it off. It wasn't interested. But going back to the chess analogy, we found that actually when we threw people a detour, like they were trying to turn right, but we forced them left, at those sorts of moments, those detours, the person has to come up with a new plan for how to get to their destination. And we actually looked at the brain activity to see if the brain was processing a search through all the possible streets ahead of them, would there be a particular part of the brain that seemed to, its activity, track that process? So the larger the number of options ahead of them, the more we could see activity in the prefrontal cortex, which is a bit of the brain we've known for a long time is essential for planning for the future. So it seems like the hippocampus is doing an automatic kind of retrieval of
No,
what's
I'll wait
possible,
till the next road.
but the prefrontal cortex is doing a search through those possibilities. Like you're making a chess
Although
move.
saying that, I do need fuel.
What is the optimal move to make?
Yeah.
It's doing that kind of consideration of the possibilities.
And the whole effect is just wiped out if people use sat-nav. So there's no activity in the hippocampus or the prefrontal cortex if sat-nav's telling you where to go.
So yeah, with all this kind of work, you're of course using statistics and carefully considering the outcomes. But what we're finding is that there's a nice strong correlation between the number of options you could do in the future and the hippocampal activity, and we don't see any of that at all. We don't see that correlation. It goes to zero effectively when you're given a sat-nav, suggesting that you really need to be thinking about retrieving that knowledge to be engaging these systems. It's not like automatically your brain just gets interested in the space around you. You have to be engaged as a person.
I suppose the question is, following on from that, what you just said about the sat-nav is, well, does it matter? I mean, are we losing anything important in terms of our just cognitive function by relying on technology rather than relying on this inbuilt navigation?
Does look nice, doesn't it?
It does imply that long-term use just relying on a sat-nav, you're not really working out those bits of your brain in that sense. Whether that actually has any negative consequences is far beyond this research, but it does ask those questions.
It's clear that this is an absolutely fascinating area of neuroscience in terms of just understanding how our brains work in a complex 3D environment. But what's next?
Yeah, the exciting thing is this has been the first study where we've really managed to combine analysis of city layouts with neuroscience. So piecing those two things together, we're specifically in London trying to move forward. We're trying to help use neuroscience to design better cities and buildings. So I'm now the scientific director of a company called the Centric Lab, based in London, where we're trying to use those neuroscience insights to work with commercial companies that are trying to build buildings, manage buildings, design cities, and we're really hoping to use that kind of knowledge. So in this specific piece of research, we can now make predictions about how a city layout will affect someone's brain and how that might be different in different people. Gathering more and more information like this, we hope to design better cities that improve well-being, comfort, productivity, and enjoyment in the city.
Hugo Spears and his study is published in Nature Communications, links as ever on the website. Finally this week, you might have heard our crossover with the film programme a couple of weeks ago, in which we pondered the nature of the alien mind as imagined on screen and in science, and how we might know that mind should first contact occur. Well, maybe we should be looking a bit closer to home. Octopuses, yes, that is the plural, please don't write in, are mysterious beasts who display all sorts of behaviours that are indicative of high cognitive function. Of the creatures that display sophisticated intelligence, I'm thinking dolphins or dogs or apes, our common ancestors are only tens of millions of years ago. But with octopuses, we haven't shared an ancestor for around 600 million years, which means that their brains are spectacularly different from our own, yet they behave in ways that we find both intriguing and familiar. Could these wonderful creatures be the key to understanding a mind very alien to us? Philosopher Peter Godfrey Smith has written a fab book called Other Minds, The Octopus and the Evolution of Intelligent Life, in which he literally dives into the oceans and delves into the workings of the octopus. He told me how our brains differ.
An animal like us, the neurons, the smart parts, the nervous system is pretty concentrated in the head between the eyes. In an octopus, more than half of the nervous system is spread throughout the body, especially in the arms. So that distinction between the controlling part of the animal,
it's not easy to turn around, is it?
The part that does what it's told, is much less clear and more problematic in the case of an octopus. Sometimes it looks like, you really should think of this as just a single animal, a single agent that's controlling what it does in a top-down way. But on occasion, it can look as if each of the arms has its own little projects. They engage in what can often look like a kind of independent exploration of their immediate environment. I mean, those arms are full of sensors of various kinds. The suckers can taste everything that they touch. And when you watch them in the sea, they can be a kind of gestalt switch sometimes. An arm can start to just wander off in a way that looks semi-self-directed.
Yeah, and in the book you talk very vividly about how octopuses sometimes extend out a single arm and have led a colleague of yours as a diver around on a little tour, it reads like a child sort of holding a hand of an adult and showing them round.
That's right, and this episode is completely baffling to us, really. We've got no idea why the octopus did this. It led Matt around for about 10 minutes. I mean, one thing that may have happened
Oh
is
God, there's no
that
beds on
this
Breaker now.
arm, which had encountered Matt, attached itself to him, and the rest of the animal wasn't paying much attention to that fact and just wandered off home and didn't realise that this
I'd
very
have to go
small
to
animal
bed,
was
get the
dragging
stamina
around a roughly
recharged. I don't want to risk it.
250-pound diver behind it.
I suppose because of the nervous system being distributed in this completely different way, this alien way to us, I suppose we need to be extremely cautious about saying that this behaviour resembles a human behaviour.
Yes, I think that's right, that with respect to the need to avoid excessive anthropomorphizing, we have habits of interpretation of one human to another which can probably misfire and lead to all sorts of errors when those habits kick in when dealing with an animal. I think that's generally the case with animals. But with an octopus, the sheer difference in their neural organization makes this more acute, because the existence of a definite self, a sort of center of experience and a center of action control, is at least somewhat more problematic in the case of an octopus than it is with a dog or a cat or a chimp or another animal that you might be looking at.
Many of the ideas about how our own consciousness and intelligence really was ramped up sort of 40 to 60,000 years ago, most of the best ideas that attempt to explain that are to do with sociality, to do with our social structure and interacting with other humans and trying to empathize and imagine the mind of another. Now, one of the things that is characteristic of the octopus, as you describe very well in the book, is that they're pretty solitary. They don't really have a social life.
And I do think that this pushes back a little bit against the theoretical trend that you were just describing, which I do agree with, by the way. I think in thinking about human evolution, the special demands of social life have a lot to do with our recent cognitive evolution. And people sometimes extrapolate from there and say, well, that this is the secret to how, any animal with a really large nervous system, this is probably how it got there. And the octopus pushes back against that line of thinking, because they're quite solitary animals and they nonetheless have these large nervous systems and very complex behaviors. So if you think, as a philosopher, I think of some philosophical temperaments as very much inclined towards the social, and some philosophical temperaments as more individualistic. And if you're on the individualistic side, then octopuses they're there with you.
Now, this notion, though, your whole book explores the question of whether we can know the mind of another creature, and especially the mind of a creature which is so alien to us. So is it even possible that we can learn about ourselves and about our own cognition by looking at something which we are, well, the more we look at it, the more we struggle to understand its own intelligence?
In a sense, we can learn about our own case, but one of the things that we learn from looking at the evolution of cephalopods, which I think of as a kind of independent experiment in the evolution of a large nervous system, it's striking where they arrive at a place that's similar to us in some respect. So, for example, the capacity to pick out individual objects in the environment and recognize them as time passes. This is the same thing I'm looking at now that I saw yesterday or at some other time. That orientation towards the
I feel like I
environment
need
in
another
which
cup of tea.
objects are picked out and recognized, that's something which almost certainly evolved independently in our line and their line. So I think one thing we can learn about what it is to be intelligent by looking at these animals is which sorts of outcomes are solutions that are arrived at repeatedly. Dan Dennett refers to them as good tricks, tricks that evolution will come up with reasonably reliably. Now, in the case of us and octopuses, you've just got these two cases, and you can learn a bit more by looking at other animals. And I think that tells us quite a lot about what it is to be an intelligent animal.
There's one behaviour which I think is restricted just to us and them, which is this ability and desire to play. And although we see play-like behaviour in lots of organisms, mostly it's training. But it looks like in octopus and in us that they play, they muck around with objects with no apparent purpose. And I wonder if that is significant in the level of intelligence, the level of cognition that we see in both us
Got to be.
and the cephalopods?
I think it's very significant, just as a really interesting thing that they do. And as you say, they do muck around with things with no apparent purpose. They like novel objects. Often they use them to decorate their dens. I remember seeing an octopus a few years ago that had found a piece of clear perspex and had essentially built itself a kind of skylight, a sort of a clear roof-like structure over its den, which I thought showed, ingenuity and good taste. Does this count as a kind of intelligence? Does that make them more sophisticated? I guess it does, although I find myself thinking it's not as if it makes them score higher on some sort of scale of intelligence. It's just a feature of the octopus mindset.
So do you think that octopuses are as near as we're going to get to experiencing an alien intelligence?
I suspect so. I'd love to be wrong. I'm very interested in the fact that there have been recent discoveries of planets that may be favourable to life. So, perhaps we'll encounter eventually a form of life which has no common ancestry with ourselves, which is a completely independently evolved being, and make some contact with it. But in the meantime, I think octopuses are a pretty decent approximation.
Just feels
Peter
a really
Godfrey
long
Smith,
trailer.
his book Other Minds is out now. It's a stunning read, thoroughly recommended.
Probably don't need to go so
That's all
wide.
for now. See you next week.
And that was BBC Inside Science on BBC Radio 4. You're listening to BBC Radio 4 from Kerbal. It's time for the shipping forecast, I think. I've got a little treat for you here. I can't believe I've done this, but you'll see what I mean. See if you recognise whose voice it is. And now it's time for the shipping forecast issued by the Met Office on behalf of the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency. Here is the general synopsis at 0700 GMT this morning. Cow in sea area Shannon moving slowly eastwards and filling. Sorry, that should read low in sea area Shannon. And now the area reports. Viking north at Sierra, south at Sierra, east at Sierra, west at Sierra, southwest at Sierra, and north-northeast at Sierra. Wind southwest, rain at times, good. 40s, 50s, 60s, Tyne, Dogger, German Bite, French Kiss and Swiss Roll. Westerly becoming cyclonic, good. Humber, Thames, Bedford, Leyland, Daff, Dover, Seoul, Hake, Halibut and Monkfish. Regular outbreaks of wind, rain at times, good. White, Portland, Plymouth, Ginger Rogers and Finisterre, light flatulence, some rain, very good. Lundy, Fundy, Sunday and Monday, wind southwest becoming cyclonic, bloody marvellous. Rockall, Soddle wind, heavy showers, absolutely incredible. Marlin, Hebrides, Bailey, Fair Isle, Cardigan, Pullover and southeast Iceland. Wind, southeast, rain at times, slightly disappointing. And now the reports for the coastal stations. Tiree, wind northwest 7 miles at 1004, rising slowly. Butt of Lewis, north 5 miles 1006, falling. Wolverhampton, northwest as far as the Ring Road 998, rising slowly. Norway, Nilboa. That was the shipping forecast as written by Les Barker. Yeah, I mean, Les Barker's recording is so much better. obviously. He's got the wit about him when he's doing it. But I really wanted to just record the shipping forecast, and I thought I might as well do Les Barker's version rather than my own. Look at the state of this lorry; it's jumping up and down all over the place, or it was in the cab. Let's just stop things here for a second. It's good that the lights have gone. Right. Yeah. How sad is that? I even put the sailing by music on there. Look. Oh dear, get a life, eh? Just really takes me back though to the days of listening to Radio 4 late at night. On the theme of the octopus, I didn't like that. Didn't like launching that. M4DB. I don't know what that is. What type of file that is. I might have to open that differently. Let's just have a look. M4DB. Not come across one of those before.
This is wonderful.
Macmillan Audio presents Other Minds, the Octopus, the Sea, and the Deep Origins of Consciousness by Peter Godfrey Smith. Read for you by Peter Noble.
Oh, that's about 6 hours long. We'll stick to it in our time.
Thank you for downloading this episode of In Our Time. For news about In Our Time and for recommendations about our archive, please follow us on Twitter at BBC In Our Time. I hope you enjoyed the programme. Hello, the ancient Greek thinker Zeno of Elea flourished in the 5th century BC. His great innovation in philosophy was the paradox, a tool to highlight the unexpected consequences of common sense ideas, to question assumptions and provoke new theories. For example, according to Zeno's paradoxes, motion is not possible. An arrow in flight does not move. The fastest runner in Homer, Achilles, could never catch up with the tortoise in a race if he gave it a head start. Philosophers from Aristotle to Bertrand Russell have tried to refute his ideas or explain them, with varying success. Innovations in mathematics with Newton and Leibniz went some way to demonstrate flaws in Zeno's arguments, but the questions he raised 2,500 years ago about time and space are as relevant as ever and have re-emerged in quantum physics. With me to discuss the paradoxes of Zeno are Marcus Eusotoi, Professor of Mathematics and Simonia Professor for the Public Understanding of Science at the University of Oxford, Barbara Sattler, Lecturer in Philosophy at the University of St Andrews, and James Warren, Reader in Ancient Philosophy at the University of Cambridge. James Warren, what do we know about Zeno?
Not a huge amount is unfortunately the answer. We know roughly when he was living and working. He's living, as you said, in the middle of the 5th century BC. He came from Elea, a town on the west coast of southern Italy.
This is very bouncy.
And we know that he travelled a lot in Greece, as people of that sort of class did, and he wrote a work, maybe just one work, which included these paradoxes, of which we know about, it depends how you count them, perhaps 7, 8, some to do with motion, some to do with plurality. What we can do is put him into some kind of context, intellectual context that is. So for around...
Let's just go into it for a moment or two. Is this a village? Is it a town? Is it known as an intellectual centre? What's going on?
It's a city in the Greek sense of a city. It's a polis. It's an independent city-state that was founded by Greeks from the Greek mainland at some point. It seems to have been quite an intellectual centre, in particular because I think one of the most important people in Zeno's intellectual life was, again, an Eleatic, was someone from the same city. This was a character called Parmenides. And Parmenides wrote a very peculiar poem in hexameter verse in the style of Homer. And Parmenides attempted to set out to prove that there was only one thing, and that it was changeless and motionless and perfect and so on.
When he said there was only one thing,
Yeah.
I mean the world was only one thing.
There is just one thing, yes. So whatever else you think there is, if it's not this one thing, that isn't actually there.
And he was Zeno's tutor,
Friend, tutor, something like that. It's not a formal relationship, but Plato writes a dialogue in which the two of them come to Athens, and Zeno is cast as a defender of Parmenides. So that's one way to think of these paradoxes, as an attempt to undercut possible objections to Parmenides' curious thesis on the basis of common sense assumptions that, well, there aren't many things, and clearly things do move.
You said quite casually he wandered over the place in the Greek,
Yeah.
as people did. What did he wander for? Where did he go to? How did he look after himself?
Well, these aren't people who really have to work for a living.
So we're talking about aristocrats?
Yes.
Well, anyway, well enough off people.
That's right, and they would travel around, and they would often, I think, the way in which these ideas were circulated were partly through written books, and Zeno complains that someone's made a pirated copy of his work, so he doesn't know how many of them there are in circulation, which is, I think, a joke on. Not even Zeno knows how many books there are. And they travelled to the great festivals, like the Athenian Panathenaea festival, and they would give demonstrations and public recitations and meet people there.
And so he got his teacher, Parmenides. What learning was
there.
coming to him
Bloody
through
hell.
Parmenides, and in the context of that place, that time, briefly? What was he reading that influenced him?
Well, what Parmenides is reacting to is a tradition of cosmological thinking, which had been going on for perhaps up to 100 years by now, of people who were attempting to explain the world and how the world worked and functioned, often in terms of identifying some basic principle or element out of which the world was constructed, and
Like the world was constructed from water.
From water or air or something else, and describing the various transformations that element or elements undergo in order to produce the varied and differentiated world that we see around us. And they're relying, therefore, on there being a plurality of things and there being things that change and are in motion in order to account for the way the world works.
So natural philosophers or people believe that the world is changing, there are many things in it which are various and unmoving and changing.
Yes, and that's what Parmenides sets out to show is grossly mistaken.
Yes. Barbara Sattler, what is a paradox in philosophy?
Right. If we just look at the word that comes from the Greek, then that means it's against para, common expectations or common beliefs, doxa, right? So that's a paradox against what people normally would assume, what is strange, what is shocking, and therefore what needs explanation. So that's just the meaning of the word. In a philosophical context, by a paradox, we normally understand that we derive a problematic conclusion from sound premises. So it seems we have good starting points and we do right reasoning, and yet we get to a conclusion that's untenable. And why is it untenable? Well, either because it's inconsistent in itself, it leads to a contradiction, or it contradicts other beliefs, opinions that we hold.
Can you give us a simple paradox? It needn't be one of Zeno's, just to get the hang of it.
Oh, right. So one paradox that's quite famous is the bald man paradox. So we all would agree that if somebody has no hair, then this person is bald. If this person has one hair, we would still call this person bald. Two hair, probably still bald. Three, and so on. But one hair doesn't seem to make a difference. But yet, if this person has 10,000 hair, it seems this person is not bald any longer, right? So where does that stop? Is it that from 100 hair onwards, we say, oh, this person is not bald, but 99 hair is still bald? That doesn't seem to be right?
As much as illustrating
because
convention.
It seems that with baldness, it's not a concept or notion where we can give a clear quantitative determination. We can't say so and so many hairs quantify as not being bald, and so and so many hairs quantify as being bald.
But as common sense applies,
hairdresser paradox.
This uses common sense, that we all agree on certain ideas of boldness, and we all have a problem of saying when a person stops being bold. And what that shows in this case is that there seem to be some notions and concepts that are what we will call vague. They are fuzzy. We can't really fully determine them.
600 quid,
right?
that's a right long
and
drive.
there's a sample
not very
of them,
much.
like, for instance, a heap of grain, right? If we have a heap of grain,
let's say 10,000 grains. I take away one grain, it's still a heap. I take another one, still a heap. A grain doesn't seem to make a difference. But if I take away so many that I'm only left with one grain, there's no heap any longer. Is there an exact moment where I can say it's not a heap any longer?
Run into any
Probably
trouble?
not.
Not at all.
Philosophers have called this kind of concept vagueness concepts, and there's lots of work done because it's also in some sense vague where the vagueness starts.
5 minutes you need
So
work.
they show.
I mean, I can see it's intriguing and it's a lot of fun, but is there any... actually, I've discovered on this programme for the last goodness knows how many years that the things that seem very odd and eccentric and rather miraculous suddenly turn out to be running the world, don't they? This idea.
Right. Okay, so in this case, I think with paradoxes, there's two reasons why they are actually very fruitful for philosophers, right? It sounds ironic because in some sense, with a paradox, you're at a dead end, and you could say, well, okay, now should we not give up? But they are very fruitful for philosophy for two reasons. Either because they show there's something funny about some concepts, like with the bald man, right? They show we are using some concepts that can't be fully determined in the way other concepts can, and that tells us perhaps something either about our concepts or perhaps even about the world, that some parts of the world are best described like this, right? Then paradoxes can also be fruitful in one other way, namely that in philosophy, a lot of what we do is actually done conceptually, right? So our theories and models and concepts are very often not just falsified or verified by the world outside, right? So how do we figure out whether our models are right or not? Well, paradoxes are very important because they tell us, okay, something has gone wrong here. You have to go back at your concept and look again whether your assumptions are really as good and true as you thought they are.
Marcus Yasotoi, that time you've written, or you've said, mathematics as an analytical subject was beginning to emerge. Mathematics were exploring abstract ideas through mathematics. Now, can that be your starting point for talking about paradoxes?
Yes, certainly. I think that before the ancient Greeks got their teeth into the subject, you've got the Egyptians and Babylonians doing a mathematics trying to describe the world with this new language, but it's very geometric, it's very functional. They're measuring areas of land, volumes of pyramids and things like that. But then the ancient Greeks, and in particular sort of in the 100 years before Zeno, we have the Pythagoreans beginning to appear on the scene, and they're trying to prove things. So they're trying to prove that it's not just a calculation that they want to do, they want to produce a proof that something will always work. So, for example...
Where did that come from?
Well, I think it's interesting because I think that the Egyptian and Babylonian mathematics came from the development of the city trying to actually control the land. But this idea of analytic thought actually comes from Greeks actually wanting to do politics, and it comes out of the idea of rhetoric and trying to explain.
How does that route work?
Well, I think that you've got suddenly the Greeks trying to prove that laws will work and that laws will always apply. So I think it sort of grows out of that sort of change of the city into a political institution. And so I think the ancient Greeks, you see a different style of mathematics, and what I would really call mathematics, this idea of analytic thinking. But it's interesting that the idea of paradox is starting to appear at this time, perhaps a little bit after Zeno, as a tool, which is this idea of a proof, reductio ad absurdum. Make a hypothesis, for example, that the square root of 2 can be written as a fraction. And then you follow that through and you end up with a ridiculous conclusion that odd numbers equal even numbers, and then you realize that that's absurd. It's a kind of paradox, but the paradox is very useful because you can then work backwards and say, okay, something along the way was wrong, and it was actually the Pythagoreans who discovered, no, this square root of 2, which is a length, it's the length across the diagonal of a square, each side has unit length, so this length cannot be written as a fraction. It can be approximated by fractions more and more, but they realized using this argument that there were new numbers here. So the idea of paradox, or this idea of teasing out a logical argument which arrives at something absurd, is a very powerful tool in actually questioning your assumptions.
One of the things, a metaphysical thing that the Greeks turned into mathematics was the idea of infinity, which they had problems with. How did they tackle that?
Well, they did have problems with infinity, and a lot of their mathematics, you can see, is very finite, it's very geometric, it's about lengths, and this discovery that the square root of 2 can't be written as to a ratio of 2.
I think he's talking about something called proof by contradiction there, which is incredible, actually. Some of the most complicated mathematical theories have been proven by contradiction. There was one I was looking at last year, and it was like 248-page proof, or the proof by contradiction was like 4 lines. I was like, wow, that's an incredible difference, isn't it? I love paradoxes in maths, but you have to understand maths to understand the paradoxes in maths. But I mean, paradoxes generally I really enjoy. Look at that shadow flickering there. There's a lot of bugs with this, isn't there? What the hell? I really noticed that. It's not smooth at all, is it? It's just flicking like a clock. This world is like one big clock. Right, might have to find somewhere to sleep as well.
Whole numbers, if you write it as an infinite, as a decimal, it goes on forever, never repeating itself, was a real challenge to their whole philosophy. But in fact, you can look back, even in the ancient Egyptians, in order to calculate the volume of a pyramid, we now know that they must have had some idea of infinitely dividing space. So it's not in the documents, but the volume, the formula that you get, actually, you have to use an idea of infinite divisibility to be able to get that formula. It's an early form of integral calculus. So already these ideas are beginning to sort of bubble up, and they're having difficulties with, okay, but infinity doesn't seem to exist. I can't see anything infinite. So they have this idea of actual infinity and what's the other one? Potential. Thank you. There you go. Potential infinity. So there's a potential for infinity. For example, Euclid proves that the primes have the potential to go on forever. But there's a claim that, well, this isn't an actual infinity. You can't actually have infinitely many primes. They have the potential to go on forever. So some of these...
I've not come across this idea, this distinction.
Paradoxes become very useful.
Because it can tease out your...
Is it a key? I mean, is it really that important, the paradox?
Well, the paradoxes will be able to reveal that your ideas of infinity might actually be wrong.
So that's what he's setting out to do.
Well, I think that he's trying to actually support Parmenides, who isn't bringing a kind of mathematical perspective on the fact that there is no such thing as motion. He's trying to actually use this now actually as a mathematical tool to question whether our perceptions of the world are actually correct or not.
So that's the idea behind it, is say, let's see what the world is about. Let's see the reality. In one sense, Plato is a dream, but this is mathematical. By mathematical analysis, it's a different reality from that which we perceive. And let's challenge Parmenides, who might have been right anyway. But by challenging him, we might unlock this. Is there something in that, James Warren?
I think that's right. I think that another thing to bear in mind is that these paradoxes are sort of playful, and they would have been a way of Zeno embarrassing an interlocutor in the way that you might remember Socrates embarrassing people. So he takes someone, he says, well, you think things move, don't you? Yes, of course I think things move. Well, wouldn't you, for example, think that you would agree, wouldn't you, that in order to get from A to B, you must get halfway from A to B? Well, yes, of course I would have to get from halfway from A to B in order to get from A to B. Well, surely you would then agree in order to get from A to halfway to B, you would have to get halfway from A to halfway between A to B, and so on and so on. And here you have another example of what we saw in Barbara's bald man case, this repeating premise. Once you've granted once that in order to get from one point to another you have to go halfway, that gets repeated and repeated and repeated.
Right, okay.
Right, exactly. So this is what
I understand now why that's
dichotomy paradox.
Right, which just means cutting in two.
More regarded as a paradox.
And that label gets associated with more than one paradox in the sources, but Aristotle, I think, associates it with a paradox of motion in the way that I've been trying to set out. So in order to cross a spatial extension, you must go halfway. But then, of course, you must go halfway to the halfway, and so on and so on.
But by saying that, what is he saying that's going to prove
what's problematic
then? Paradox.
It's like
what's
the
problematic then is
of
that you've got your person to agree that in order to cross any spatial extension, in fact that entails an endless series of prior journeys, if you like. So in order to do something, first I have to do something prior. And if that's an endless series of prior requirements before I even get started, then you can the killer line will say, but you don't think you can complete an infinite series of tasks, can you? It would be impossible to do an infinite series of journeys. Well, I suppose that's true, and there's obviously a sense in which that is true. In which case, it now looks like in order to cross a room, that's asking me to do something impossible.
Aristotle rose up against these paradoxes again and again, didn't he? It becomes like a sort of heavyweight championship at one stage. Zeno says this, and Aristotle weighs in biff. What did he biff about on this one?
Well, on this one, he thinks, as we've just, it's Aristotle's distinction between potential and actual infinity. He thinks it's misdescribing the job to say that you have to complete an actual series of infinite journeys. Potentially, if you wanted, you could think of your journey as including however many sub-journeys that you like, but you don't actually have to do all of those in order to cross the room. But Aristotle's working from the assumption that,
like a
of
fortress
course, Zeno must be wrong, because, of course, things do move, and there are many things. So he's of the opinion that the absurdity of the conclusion licenses you to think there must be something wrong with the argument, and he can just move on and carry on writing his book on physics.
But the argument goes on. That's the interesting thing, isn't it? Great as Aristotle is, and so he doesn't kill it. I mean, it continues, it emerges, it re-emerges, and Barbara Sattler, probably the best-known paradox is Achilles and the tortoise. Can you tell us what's happening there?
Sure.
What Zeno says is happening there.
Right. So Achilles and the tortoise is basically a variation of the dichotomy paradox that we have just heard from James. So imagine that Achilles, who is the fastest runner in the ancient world, has a race with the slowest runner in the ancient world, a tortoise, as its later tradition calls it. And because Achilles is the fastest runner, he can give the tortoise a head start, right? So let's imagine they are racing on a 100-meter racetrack, and the tortoise is starting 10 meters in. So what now has to happen is that first Achilles has to cover these 10 meters that the tortoise was given as a head start. But during the time that Achilles takes in order to cover these 10 meters, well, the tortoise will have moved on. Not very far because it's very slow, but let's say the tortoise moved on for a meter. Well, next thing that Achilles has to do is to cover this 1 meter. During that time, while he's covering this 1 meter, the tortoise will have moved on yet again, let's say 10 centimeters. Again, the same happens. So the distance between Achilles and the tortoise will get less and less, but it will never get to zero. So it seems that Achilles, even though he's the fastest runner in the ancient world, will never be able to overtake this slow tortoise, right? So that's the paradox.
Like I said this once before, and I'll never say it again after this. Did common sense rear its head?
So common sense, if you wanted, reared its head in that some people thought, oh, okay, we can just contradict Zeno by getting up and running and showing that, we can overtake somebody, right? But I don't think that Zeno wanted to show we will never experience somebody overtaking somebody else, right? Or somebody covering a finite distance. Rather, what he's telling us is, okay, and you give me an explanation of how this happens. You give me an account. You describe what is going on, and you will get into contradictions, right? So even though we experience it, we can't give a good explanation of it.
I think the paradox is more interesting than common sense, actually, and obviously it leads to more things, don't you think?
It as you said before, it pops up over and over again. So that shows that people have thought, okay, there's something still going on. Something in this paradox shows that if we try to explain motion, change, time and space, there are still problems that we get into and that get us into these contradictions, and that Zeno for the first time raised.
So can you unpick that more? Can we go into this? Why is this fascinating, and why does it continue? I sort of rather brutally said, what about common sense? Of course, I mean, boringly said that. But what is interesting is that the idea goes on. What is interesting is that the idea is a powerful idea and is still employed in various ways and today. So can you let's go into that. What's going on?
Well, there's really the challenge of the infinite, and in particular something called an infinite series, because we're having to add up infinitely many things and understand whether that's actually sort of physically possible. So the way mathematicians eventually resolve this is to say, well, okay, how long does it take Achilles to do this infinite number of tasks? So let's say he does the first step in half a minute, the second step he does in half the time, so a quarter of a minute, the third step in an eighth of a minute. the next step in a 16th of a minute. So it looks like he's having to do infinitely many tasks, but we understand this now, that he can do infinitely many tasks because it can take him a finite amount of time. This infinite series, a half plus a quarter plus an eighth plus a 16th, actually adds up, if you take infinitely many of them, to the answer 1. And you can sort of see that. If you imagine a cake, and you cut the cake in half, and then you cut the half in a quarter, and then an eighth, and then a 16th, you can see that you'll be cutting each of the smaller pieces in half again, but it won't be any more than 1. So we know that this infinitely many tasks will take a finite amount of time. And it's interesting, maybe it takes less than a minute. So mathematicians had to come up with some sort of way of understanding adding up infinitely many things. And it doesn't mean that adding up anything will always work. For example, take the add a half plus a third plus a quarter plus a fifth plus a sixth plus a seventh plus an eighth. You might say, well, those are getting very, very small. Maybe that adds up to something finite. But Orome in the 14th century proved that actually, no, that can become as large as you want. So Zeno is already challenging us with how do you understand how to add up infinitely many things in mathematics, and does that have some sort of physical reality? And it really took till 17th, 18th century for mathematicians to come up with some way to understand how to navigate these infinitely many numbers and add them up and understand when they are finite and when they could be infinite.
What's fascinating to me, a non-mathematician, and I'll go back to you for a moment, Barbara, if I may, is what grabbed people, mathematicians, about this? Why was this so important to keep studying this, which was, I think you have used the word, not me this time, in your notes, patently ridiculous, but away they go. What is so fascinating about it?
So one thing that's so fascinating about it is that it seems in the physical reality we don't have a problem with these things, right? We can do this run, Achilles can overtake the tortoise, no problem. But yet in mathematics, which we use in order to describe the physical reality, there seemed to be a real problem with this, dealing with infinity, right? So our most powerful tool to describe reality and to deal with it, which we use in natural science all the time, right? That seemed to be too weak to deal with that. That seemed to get us into contradictions. And if you have a contradiction, then you have a trouble with your science. It's not a solid science if there.
It's a bit much as well. Times. They're very fast talkers, aren't they? Some of them. I'm a slow-paced talker, so I prefer slow-paced talkers. I think. Let's have a look. Okay, hello, is there any new cargo for me to deliver? Your timing is perfect. We have back-to-back deliveries today. We have a trailer to take to Fajita Break. Once there, you'll have to bring another from there to Heimsburger. Are you up for it? Yeah, certainly. What's the cargo? From here to Fajita Break, it's a load of aluminium profiles needed only for building construction. And then from Fajita to Hamburger, you have a cargo of aluminium billets being exported to an offshore buyer. Sounds like an important delivery. It is. Please don't let me down. Still under pressure. Does it show? I'm still looking for truckers, but they're steering clear of me. Mostly due to the number of incidents we've been experiencing. Glad you came along when you did. Should be plenty of truckers around wanting work. Well, you can count on me. Everything will work out just fine. Thanks. I hope you're right. Okay, let's go grab that trailer. The aluminium factory. Oh, that's not the way out, that's the way in.
is a contradiction at heart, right? So that's why mathematicians were really fighting with that and saying, okay, if we don't want a contradiction at the very basis of our science, right? And then in the 17th and 18th century, as Marcus said, there was a new way of dealing with, infinite series. Then with Cauchy, we have dealing with limits. We have in the 19th century a new way of dealing with actual infinity. Remember, with Aristotle, we had this distinction between potential and actual infinity, and there was always this idea there can't be actual infinity, there can only be potential. And then with Cantor and others, we had this idea, no, there can be an actual infinity, and that just needs a different way of dealing with it. That goes against our intuitions, by the way.
James Warren, it seems to me that mathematics is being used in a philosophical way all the way here. The idea is still, let's go back to Parmenides saying bluntly, the world does not move, nothing moves, it is one thing. It is not many things, as you natural philosophers have been thinking for the last few centuries. It doesn't change all the time, it doesn't move all. It is one thing. That's what I propose. Like a previous person said, it's all water. He'd done that. And so we're into the fact that it sort of has a comic aspect as mathematical things, is a superficial reading of it, because the mathematicians are going for something else, aren't they?
I think one of the things that might emerge from talking about these paradoxes in a mathematical way is the relationship that mathematical analysis has to these kinds of physical cases. So the question whether, in fact, mathematics is an abstracted description of what's going on, or that somehow we can construct physical extensions and so on out of mathematical items is worth thinking about. So, for example, one of the things Aristotle complains about is that one of these problems that Zeno raises is driven by the idea that somehow an extension just is an infinite collection of points. And he says, well, that's just not the case. You can't make a line out of points any more than you can construct a duration out of instants. What a mathematical point does is an abstracted... what you're doing is taking an extension that's already there and picking out something out of it. You're not constructing the world mathematically.
So let's look at that notion with regard to the arrow in flight or the arrow at rest. Parmenides argued, and Zeno puts it forward, that the arrow never moves. So somebody shoots an arrow and it never moves. What's going on there?
Right, so the absurd conclusion here is that the moving arrow is always at rest. And the reconstruction that we get of it from Aristotle goes something like this, that if you imagine an arrow that's being loosed from a bow heading towards a target, if you think of any point in the arrow's journey, by point I mean now an instant, a temporal point, so imagine taking a photograph of it that captures an instant in that flight. At that point, the arrow is occupying a space exactly arrow-shaped and arrow-sized, and it's not moving within that space. It's stationary at that instant. You can think of it that either it's too snugly held by space, or there's not enough time for it to do any moving, because we've specified that we're talking about an instant, so a durationless point in time. But that's the case throughout the arrow's journey. You could pick any instant in the arrow's journey, and it would always be the case that at that instant the arrow is stationary. So it seems to be true throughout the journey that the arrow is not moving.
And Aristotle said?
Well, Aristotle says this is false because a duration is not made of nows.
Yes, a duration can have essential state. Can we keep on the arrow? Because it's such a graphic one. People listening, you have the arrow, photograph the arrow, and it doesn't seem to be moving except for that instant. But even in that instant, is it not moving fractionally, very fractionally? Are we not seeing it between two so fractional movements that we can't see the movements? Or are we seeing it, does that rest, what does that rest mean?
Well, I think it's the challenge of this arrow is changing speed. It's decelerating as it goes towards, so it's got a different speed at every particular time. And it was the real challenge of actually, for it to be moving, it has to have a speed. And if you just take an instant of time, the time interval is 0, well, the distance it's gone is 0, but speed is distance divided by time. So you're trying to make sense of, well, it doesn't have a speed then, does it? Distance divided by 0 time. But you're absolutely right in the way you try to approach that problem, because, and you've just invented the calculus, Melvin, because what Newton and Leibniz did is to realise that actually this thing does have a speed, but you've got to understand it as the time interval that you're taking gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So if you take the time interval of 1 second before the snapshot you've done, then you've got an average speed, the distance it's gone over that 1 second divided by the 1 second. Now take the time interval a little bit smaller, and you get another average speed, but it's slightly slower for the half second before then, and the quarter second. So you see, though, that the speed is actually tending towards a limit, and calculus is making sense of this challenge that Zeno has said. Well, what is the speed? It's 0 divided by 0. It doesn't have a speed. That's meaningless. It isn't moving. Newton and Leibniz say, no, we have a mathematics now developed by Newton and Leibniz to actually understand a world in flux and be able to say at one instance of time what the speed of the arrow is.
James Warren.
I don't think Zeno would be impressed by that.
Really?
I think that's mathematically clever, but philosophically not so smart, because you've cheated. You've assumed the arrow is moving, and then have described how it can be moving at a time, at an instant, on the assumption that it is crossing some distance. And that's precisely what that question. You can't help yourself to the conclusion that you're trying to get. And his second point would be, well, surely you would agree then that if we can allow ourselves that now can be described as an instant, it's true that the arrow isn't moving now. And if it isn't moving now, when on earth is it moving?
Well, I would say that moving means it has a speed, and Newton and Leibniz have given you a way to say what the speed of that is. Oh my gosh, are they ganging up on you? The math
I'm ganging up against both of you.
Okay, right.
Think of the bridge and the man defending it, they're all rushing at him.
Just turn the engine off.
In support of Marcus, so philosophers afterwards tried to actually think of motion really in that way. So with Russell and others, we have this idea of the ad theory of motion, as it's called. So that motion is nothing but being at a particular point at a particular time, right? And the difference between motion and rest is just that you look at the surrounding, right? And if you look at the surrounding, then something in motion will be at a different point in space at the next moment of time, and something at rest will still be at the same point. So that has been a famous theory, ad theory. But I would gang up, help James here, saying this is a very useful way in mathematics to describe motion, right? And we have come to use it and employ it all the time. It doesn't tell us that motion consists of these points, right? It tells us we can describe motion in this way, in this mathematical way. It's very useful to do that, but it doesn't tell us that we really have understood what's going on with motion in this sense.
Well, it's interesting because actually there's a modern day effect in quantum physics which actually says that that motion sort of doesn't happen. It's called the quantum Zeno effect, which is quantum physics says two electrons can be sort of at two places at the same time, but when you observe them, so it could be here and there, but when I observe it, it has to make up its mind where it is, so it's there. But then as I don't look, it starts to evolve again. But if I look very quickly, it's mostly there, and so it collapses back into the there state. So actually, this is called the Zeno quantum effect, because if I keep on looking at it, actually I can stop this thing evolving. So I've actually brought a pot of uranium into the studio, which is the same effect. If I keep on observing this, I can actually stop it radiating, because it can never has a chance to move because of my observations.
That's like magic. I mean, it's more.
Oh, I know.
I'm fascinated by all this stuff, and I'm fascinated by magic. So there you are, hands up. So, but you look at it and it stops moving. Now, what's going on?
And it's actually,
are you the only one? Can I look at it?
No, as long as someone's looking at it.
I mean, this is the challenge of quantum physics, but it's actually been done in experiments. So Turing was the first to come up with, Alan Turing, the mathematician, with potentially this is the consequences of this. I mean, actually, anyone who's a Doctor Who fan will know that this is the key to the weeping angels, which, provided you keep on looking at them, are these statues which don't move, but you look away and then they start moving. So in a way, Zeno is saying, I'm looking at this thing, it's not moving, but if I look away, maybe maybe it's the arrow comes towards me.
Where's Zeno in all this, Barbara?
Well, I mean, Zeno re-emerges with this paradox, so people again have jumped on, the name Zeno because they think there's something similar going on, a similar motivation. But I think what that brings up, this example that Marcus just gave us, is that we have to ask whether on the quantum level, motion works in the very same way as it does on, the bigger level, so to say, when we move, right? When we move, we think we can talk about continuous motion, and there the question is, well, how do we really explain then getting from one point to the next, right? Isn't there more to motion? But on the quantum level, it seems that there is this discontinuous jumps, if you want, right? So motion may work completely different on this level.
James, you want to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that there was an ancient set of quantum theorists who did indeed react to Zeno in an interesting way. So you can tell a reasonable and plausible story that says ancient atomist theory emerged as a response to Zenonian paradoxes.
This is in the 4th century BC.
Yeah, towards the end of the 5th and going forward. Yeah. And so, because what they do when they're faced with the paradoxes as we've set them out is they deny the premise that division can carry on endlessly. That they say there isn't in fact an endless series of journeys that I need to make across the room. There's a very large number of them, but eventually you'll get to a point where you can't divide any further, and you have an indivisible but extended space of which you can't cross only a half of. So once you get going, then Zeno's conclusion doesn't follow.
I mean, one thing that shows, I think, is that Zeno's paradoxes were extremely fruitful because they sparked the following natural philosophers to come up with some solutions. So the atomic solution to say, well, there are indivisible minima and we can't go on dividing infinitely is one. Aristotle is another. All natural philosophers after Zeno, in some way or other, had to find a way to deal with them if they wanted to do natural philosophy.
Can you see an overarching system in Zeno's paradoxes? I mean, Parmenides had a simple overarching system, nothing moves. And let's keep him in mind because he's the starting point. Zeno, by defending Parmenides, his tutor and his friend, posited the opposite and then tried to destroy the opposite. That was his method of doing it.
I think the way to put it is that what the paradoxes show is the assumption that there are many things and that things move is no less fraught with difficulty and no less absurd than thinking that there's only one thing and it doesn't move. So it's difficult to assert a kind of systematic approach.
How am I supposed to hook up on that?
We have a set of them that seem to deny motion on various counts. There are some that seem to be attacking the bare notion of plurality in various ways. And I think it would be hard to think that there was some kind of overarching point to them. And that's in a way why they're kind of fruitful, because he isn't offering a particular worldview, I think. What he's doing is raising problems for a very, very general set of assumptions. You don't need to be Aristotle to be bothered by Zeno. You don't need to have a very specific physical outlook to be bothered by Zeno. The premises that he starts with are extremely general and very common.
Is there any way in which we can start to characterize how these ideas are in play now, Marcus?
Very much so.
We've talked about Leibniz and Newton being exercised by them. Bertrand Russell was with his set of sets and so on and so forth. But you talk in your notes about how these are in play now.
I love that paradox.
I think the idea of a paradox is still very much used today to tease out and challenge our view of reality. Certainly when we're getting down onto the quantum level or the cosmic level, our intuition is generally quite wrong, and the idea of paradox is quite important in just saying, look, there's still something to sort out here. And I think, Zeno, we talked about quantum physics and the fact that actually the universe may be made out of bits. There may be a shortest distance that you can go, and you can't divide that. Quantum means bitty, and even time, there is a challenge now that time is quantized and comes in bits. And so I think this idea of, infinitely many tasks, that was what the kind of challenge at the heart of trying to overtake the tortoise is, to do infinitely many things. And there have been sort of more recent challenges. Okay, is that physically possible in our universe? Actually, is our universe, as the ancient Pythagoreans thought, very finite in its nature and made up of, doesn't have sort of infinite decimals in its kind of makeup. And so there are these new challenges called super tasks. Can you switch on a light on and off, and half the time between you're switching the light on and off? And if you do that in 1 minute, is the light on or off at the end of this? And it doesn't seem to make a sense. So sort of challenges, can you do infinitely many sort of discrete actions? I guess the point about Achilles is that it's a continuous and you can join them up. But if you have these discrete things as switching a light on after half a minute, off after a quarter of a minute, on after an eighth of a minute, off after a 16th of a minute, is that actually ever physically going to be possible? And what is the end result at when you add all of these up at the minute? Whether is the light on or off? So these paradoxes are still very relevant today in teasing out just the nature of reality and our intuition about it.
Before we leave this, I'd like to sort of tip a bow to Parmenides, who, as it were, has his idea of the world not moving got any traction at all?
There are some people in philosophy who have now gone back to some form of monism, right? Who say, well, at the deep level of reality, there is just one thing. Some people think it is just a question of dependence. So everything depends on, there being one thing, namely the universe. Other people think, no, it's just in general, there's just one thing. It sounds funny, and monism, I think, is not something that is immediately very attractive to the common sense. But some philosophers in Jonathan Schaeffer, Michael Della Rocca, and so on, contemporary philosophers have gone back to that and said, okay, metaphysically, it does make sense to say at the ultimate level there is only one thing, even though it contains, so to say, everything.
What does it mean, one thing, one source of energy, one type of energy? Is that what he means?
Well,
I'll get a nap. What's a thing?
Okay, that's a very good question. Yeah. What is a thing, right? So it's also not clear that with Parmenides whether he really thought about the universe or whether he wouldn't think about something that's completely non-physical, right? For him, it was very important that we don't get into contradictions. So the only thing that we can think of is just one thing, something that has no differences, no distinctions, no extension. That doesn't quite sound physical to us, right? So for him, it seemed to be something logical.
Do you want to add to that, James?
No. I think Barbara's captured that rather well. That there is an attraction to monism in the sense that it would be nice to be able to find a simple explanation. Simplicity is something that natural scientists look for, and what could be more simple than there really only being one thing at all? That sounds like a perfect end result.
And finally, Marcus.
Well, I think mathematicians think they've sorted these paradoxes out, and the invention of infinite series and the calculus gives us a way to explain them. But I think actually there's still the challenge of whether mathematics is really describing reality.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed that. Nice to be back. Barbara Sattler, Marcus Isojo, James Warren, thank you very much. Next week it's 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. Yes, we'll be talking about Animal Farm by George Orwell.
And the In Our Time podcast gets some extra time now with a few minutes of bonus material from Melvin and his guests.
What did we not talk about that we should have talked about?
Well, there are the paradoxes of plurality that we didn't discuss, but they were sort of in the offing when you were asking Barbara what a thing is.
Exactly, that's where I thought, should I not jump on? But you wanted to talk about Parmenides.
So and those are very peculiar.
They ask the question basically, what makes one thing, right? And how can we be sure that these two things here, for instance, are two different things? Well, because there's another thing in between. Just air, okay, but how can I be sure that air is different from that one? And they are, in some sense, less attractive, but they raise this important question: what makes a thing a thing?
Yeah, I think it also relates to the tension that was raised about how can infinitely many points make a line, because a point has no distance. So if you add something which has zero distance to something which has zero distance, it's still got zero distance. Yeah. And that was the real challenge of. And you mentioned Cantor. I'm glad you got that in because Cantor, around that time, you're understanding the idea of the continuum. There are different sorts of infinity. So actually, if you take an uncountable number of points, it can have measure. Right. The idea that infinitely many points with no size can actually be put together to make something with size. I mean, and that was a real challenge of 19th century mathematics to come up with a way of understanding that ability to measure and make a ruler is made up of distances, square root of 2, pi, and something like that. But these numbers have no distance. It's really like the arrow, Zeno's arrow. So how can you have all of these numbers actually make up a ruler?
Standard, yeah.
That's I think very similar to Zeno's Millitsi
awkward
paradox,
road that
which is
one
different
that the
again from
wants to take me on.
how many grains make a heap paradox. But it's
on
saying, well, if I drop a single seed, it doesn't make a noise.
Well, I think it does, you see. We can't hear it, that's all. Yeah. And maybe an ant can hear it. There goes a millet seed, I'll pop across and have
but there's a difference between it disturbing the air and it making a noise. But it's clear that a large number of millet seeds don't make a noise.
Can I rest on mine for a moment? I know I'm outdone completely, but still. If it drops, in my view, it'll make a sound. And the sound can be heard by those with ears to hear.
Okay.
Maybe an ant. That may be what he's been waiting for since he woke up.
Not in the quantum world. That's not the case.
So half a millet seed then, or half a millet seed.
I think the interesting thing is you're getting to quantum physics now.
With big ears.
But this is what Einstein won his Nobel Prize for, essentially, is to understand that there are actually thresholds below which you cannot activate things. And so this idea of infinitely dividing something was a real challenge. The quantum world says, no, you can't just keep on lowering the amplitude of a sound wave. At some point it flatlines and there's a gap. And that quantum gap, it's the Planck constant. So I think that's why all of these paradoxes are really still very relevant today.
I mean, it's this
the pixelated universe,
that we talked about in the beginning about boldness and a heap of grains.
Everything's
and in some sense it also falls in there, saying, can we specify, from 3 grains onwards we can hear it or not? And then quantum physics tells us, yeah, we can. But in with many other concepts, it seems just arbitrary to say, okay, from 5 hair onwards.
I was interested you chose that as a paradox, actually, because I thought you were going to, as soon as you mentioned hair, I thought you were going to go for something like the barber, the barber who only
shaves those who don't shave themselves.
Which leads, and you realise that's. But I'm glad you didn't choose that, because I feel that's just a paradox of language in the sense that this thing cannot exist.
Right.
But I suppose that's the point. You're trying to show that there can't be a barber who only shaves those who don't shave themselves. The paradox is
the barber.
Yeah, the paradox is resolved by saying this person does not exist. Your hypothesis that there is such a thing. So I think that's there's a reductio ad absurdum.
But I think the important thing was there's kind of 2 different ways in which paradoxes.
The producer comes to make the most announcement.
That means
sorry to interrupt. Who'd like tea or half a cup of tea?
Oh, this will run and run. Yeah.
There are more than 700 programs to download and listen to for free from the In Our Time website, where you'll also find a reading list for this episode.
Strange, actually, in our time, since they started doing like not the outtakes, but the bonus material discussion. I mean, that's obviously like now just in my mind a staple, but I presume on the main radio you don't hear those bonus parts, you just hear the main bit, really. What is this bounce all about? That's shocking, actually. I'm going to have a look at that. That's really bouncy. It's a bit disconcerting, isn't it? It makes you feel a bit sick. So bouncy. Slammed on the brakes there. What are my tyres like? They're getting worn, aren't they? I'm getting worn. Oh, does that road go up that hill? I wonder. Where are we? Oh, it sort of does, doesn't it? I could take that route, I thought we were going back to the down here to that workshop, but we could have a look through here. I don't, depending on. Yeah, because I was going to go to fuel and bed, wasn't I? But it might be worth having a. Or did I get fuel and bed? I did. And still, it's worth a look, isn't it? Just see somewhere different off the main route. I don't think I've been on this route. Oh no, I have. Yeah, I did the first time, didn't I? I took that route there. Another look down here. just pull over here for a second. See if there's anything. I might just get a Ray Bradbury on, actually.
A Sound of Thunder by Ray Bradbury. Narrated by Zach Walls. The sign on the wall seemed to quaver under a film of sliding warm water. Eccles felt his eyelids blink over his stare, and the sign burned in this momentary darkness. Time Safari Inc. Safaris to any year in the past. You name the animal, we take you there. You shoot it. A warm phlegm gathered in Eccles' throat. He swallowed and pushed it down. The muscles around his mouth formed a smile as he put his hand slowly out upon the air. And in that hand waved a check for $10,000 at the man behind the desk. Does this safari guarantee I come back alive? We guarantee nothing, said the official, except the dinosaurs. He turned. This is Mr. Travis, your safari guide in the past. He'll tell you what and where to shoot. If he says no shooting, no shooting. If you disobey instructions, there's a stiff penalty of another $10,000.
Oh, look at this.
Plus possible government action on your return. Eccles glanced across the vast office at a mass and tangle, a snaking and humming of wires and steel boxes, at an aurora that flickered now orange, now silver, now blue. There was a sound like a gigantic bonfire burning all of time, all the years and all the parchment calendars, all the hours piled high and set aflame. A touch of the hand and this burning world, on the instant, beautifully reversed itself. Eccles remembered the wording in the advertisements to the letter. Out of chars and ashes, out of dust and coals, like golden salamanders, the old years, the green years, might leap, roses sweeten the air, white hair turn Irish black, wrinkles vanish. All, everything fly back to seed, flee death, rush down to their beginnings. Suns rise in western skies and set in glorious easts. Moons eat themselves opposite to the custom. All and everything cupping one in another like Chinese boxes. Rabbits into hats. All and everything returning to the fresh death, the seed death, the green death, to the time before the beginning. A touch of a hand might do it, the merest touch of a hand. Helen damn, Eccles breathed, the light of the machine on his thin face. A real time machine. He shook his head. Makes you think. If the election had gone badly yesterday, I might be here now running away from the results. Thank God Keith won. He'll make a fine president of the United States. Yes, said the man behind the desk. We're lucky. If Deutscher had gotten in, we'd have the worst kind of dictatorship. There's an anti-everything man for you. A militarist, anti-Christ, anti-human, anti-intellectual. People called us up. You know, joking but not joking. Said if Deutscher became president, they wanted to go live in 1492. Of course, it's not our business to conduct escapes, but to form safaris. Anyway, Keith's president now. All you got to worry about is shooting my dinosaur. Eccles finished it for him. A Tyrannosaurus Rex, the Thunder Lizard, the damnedest monster in history. Sign this release. Anything happens to you, we're not responsible. Those dinosaurs are hungry. Eccles flushed angrily. Trying to scare me? Frankly, yes. We don't want anyone going who'll panic at the first shot. 6 safari leaders were killed last year, and a dozen hunters. We're here to give you the damnedest thrill a real hunter ever asked for, traveling you back 60 million years to bag the biggest damned game of all time. Your personal check's still there. Tear it up. Mr. Eccles looked at the check for a long time. His fingers twitched. Good luck, said the man behind the desk. Mr. Travis, he's all yours. They moved silently across the room, taking their guns with them, toward the machine, toward the silver metal and the roaring light. First a day, and then a night, and then a day, and then a night. Then it was day, night, day, night, day. A week, a month, a year, a decade. AD 2055, AD 2019, 1999, 1957. Gone. The machine roared. They put on their oxygen helmets and tested the intercoms. Eccles swayed on the padded seat, his face pale, his jaw stiff. He felt the trembling in his arms, and he looked down and found his hands tight on the new rifle. There were 4 other men in the machine. Travis, the safari leader, his assistant, Lesperance, and 2 other hunters, Billings and Kramer. They sat looking at each other, and the years blazed around them. "Can these guns get a dinosaur cold?" Eccles felt his mouth saying. "If you hit them right," said Travis on the helmet radio. "Some dinosaurs have 2 brains, one in the head, another far down the spinal column. We stay away from those. That's stretching luck. Put your first 2 shots into the eyes, if you can. Blind them, and go back into the brain." The machine howled. Time was a film run backward. Suns fled, and 10 million moons fled after them. "Good God," said Eccles. "Every hunter that ever lived would envy us today. This makes Africa seem like Illinois." The machine slowed. Its scream fell to a murmur. The machine stopped. The sun stopped in the sky. The fog that had enveloped the machine blew away, and they were in an old time. A very old time indeed. 3 hunters and 2 safari heads with their blue metal guns across their knees. "Christ isn't born yet," said Travis. "Moses has not gone to the mountain to talk with God. The pyramids are still in the earth, waiting to be cut out and put up.
65 million years
Remember
ago,
that.
isn't it, for dinosaurs?
Alexander, Caesar, Napoleon, Hitler, none of them exists." The men nodded. "That," Mr. Travis pointed, "is the jungle of 60,002,055 years before President Keith." He indicated a metal path that struck off into green wilderness, over steaming swamp, among giant ferns and palms.
Oh, I
"And
don't know where
that,"
this train is
he
going.
said, "is the path laid by Time Safari for your use.
Oh, I missed it. I don't know
It
why I've
floats
turned
6
down here.
inches above the earth, doesn't touch so much as one grass blade, flower, or tree. It's an anti-gravity metal. Its purpose is to keep you from touching this world of the past in any way. Stay on the path. Don't go off it. I repeat, don't go off. For any reason. If you fall off, there's a penalty. And don't shoot any animal we don't okay." "Why?" asked Eccles. They sat in the ancient wilderness. Far birds' cries blew on a wind, and the smell of tar and an old salt sea, moist grasses, and flowers the color of blood. "We don't want to change the future. We don't belong here in the past. The government doesn't like us here. We have to pay big graft to keep our franchise. A time machine is damn finicky business. Not knowing it, we might kill an important animal, a small bird, a roach, a flower even, thus destroying an important link in a growing species." "That's not clear," said Eccles. "All right," Travis continued. "Say we accidentally kill 1 mouse here. That means all future families of this one particular mouse are destroyed, right?" "Right." "And all the families of the families of the families of that 1 mouse. With a stamp of your foot, you annihilate first 1, then a dozen, then 1,000, 1,000,000, 1,000,000,000 possible mice." "So they're dead," said Eccles. "So what?" "So what?" Travis snorted quietly. "Well, what about the foxes that need those mice to survive? For want of 10 mice, a fox dies. For want of 10 foxes, a lion starves. For want of a lion, all manner of insects, vultures, infinite billions of life forms are thrown into chaos and destruction. Eventually, it all boils down to this. 59 million years later, a caveman, one of a dozen on the entire world, goes hunting wild boar or saber-toothed tiger for food. But you, friend, have stepped on all the tigers in that region by stepping on 1 single mouse. So the caveman starves, And the caveman, please note, is not just any expendable man, no. He is an entire future nation. From his loins would have sprung 10 sons, from their loins 100 sons, and thus onward to a civilization. Destroy this one man, and you destroy a race, a people, an entire history of life. It is comparable to slaying some of Adam's grandchildren. The stamp of your foot on one mouse could start an earthquake, the effects of which could shake our earth and destinies down through time, to their very foundations. With the death of that one caveman, 1 billion others yet unborn are throttled in the womb. Perhaps Rome never rises on its 7 hills. Perhaps Europe is forever a dark forest, and only Asia waxes healthy and teeming. Step on a mouse and you crush the pyramids. Step on a mouse and you leave your print, like a Grand Canyon across eternity. Queen Elizabeth might never be born. Washington might not cross the Delaware. There might never be a United States at all. So be careful. Stay on the path. Never step off. I see, said Eccles. Then it wouldn't pay for us even to touch the grass? Correct. Crushing certain plants could add up infinitesimally. A little error here would multiply in 60 million years, all out of proportion. Of course, maybe our theory is wrong. Maybe time can't be changed by us. Or maybe it can be changed only in little subtle ways. A dead mouse here makes an insect imbalance there, a population disproportion later, a bad harvest further on, a depression, mass starvation, and finally, a change in social temperament in far-flung countries. Something much more subtle like that. Perhaps only a soft breath, a whisper, a hair, pollen on the air, such a slight, such change that unless you looked close, you wouldn't see it. Who knows? Who really can say he knows? We don't know. We're guessing. But until we do know for certain whether our messing around in time can make a big roar or a little rustle in history, we're being damned careful. This machine, this path, your clothing and bodies were sterilized, as you know, before the journey. We wear these oxygen helmets so we can't introduce our bacteria into an ancient atmosphere. How do we know which animals to shoot? They're marked with red paint, said Travis. Today before our journey, we sent Lesperance here back with the machine. He came to this particular era and followed certain animals. Studying them? Right, said Lesperance. I tracked them through their entire existence, noting which of them lives longest. Not long. How many times they mate? Not often. Life's short. When I find one that's going to die when a tree falls on him, or one that drowns in a tar pit, I note the exact hour, minute, and second. I shoot a paint bomb. It leaves a red patch on his side. We can't miss it. Then I correlate our arrival in the past so that we meet the monster not more than 2 minutes before he would have died anyway. This way, we kill only animals with no future, that are never going to mate again. You see how careful we are? But if you came back this morning in time, said Eccles eagerly, you must have bumped into us, our safari. How did it turn out? Was it successful? Did all of us get through? Alive? Travis and Lesperance gave each other a look. That'd be a paradox, said the latter. Time doesn't permit that sort of mess, a man meeting himself. When such occasions threaten, time steps aside, like an airplane hitting an air pocket. You felt the machine jump just before we stopped? That was us passing ourselves on the way back to the future. We saw nothing. There's no way of telling if this expedition was a success, if we got our monster, or whether all of us, meaning you, Mr. Eccles, got out alive. Eccles smiled palely. Cut that, said Travis sharply. Everyone on his feet. They were ready to leave the machine. The jungle was high, and the jungle was broad, and the jungle was the entire world forever and forever. Sounds like music and sounds like flying tents filled the sky, and those were pterodactyls soaring with cavernous gray wings, gigantic bats out of a delirium and a night fever. Eccles, balanced on the narrow path, aimed his rifle playfully. Stop that, said Travis. Don't even aim for fun, damn it. If your gun should go off. Eccles flushed. Where's our Tyrannosaurus? Lesperance checked his wristwatch. Up ahead. We'll bisect his trail in 60 seconds. Look for the red paint, for Christ's sake. Don't shoot till we give the word. Stay on the path. Stay on the path. They moved forward in the wind of morning. Strange,
I might get my tires
murmured
done.
Eccles. Up ahead, 60 million years. Election day over. Keith made president. Everyone's celebrating. And here we are, a million years lost, and they don't exist. The things we worried about for months, a lifetime, not even born or thought about yet. Safety catches off, everyone, ordered Travis. You, first shot, Eccles. Second Billings, third Kramer. I've hunted tiger, wild boar, buffalo, elephant, but Jesus, this is it, said Eccles. I'm shaking like a kid.
The garage this time.
Ah, said Travis. Everyone stopped. Travis raised his hand. Ahead, he whispered. In the mist. Ooh. There he is. There's his royal majesty now.
New truck.
The jungle was wide and full of twitterings, rustlings, murmurs, and sighs. Suddenly, it all ceased, as if someone had shut a door. Silence. A sound of thunder. Out of the mist, 100 yards away, came Tyrannosaurus Rex. Jesus God, whispered Eccles. Shh. It came on great oiled, resilient, striding legs. It towered 30 feet above half of the trees,
60
a great evil god, folding its delicate watchmaker's claws close to its oily reptilian chest. Each lower leg was a piston, 1,000 pounds of white bone, sunk in thick ropes of muscle, sheathed over in a gleam of pebbled skin, like the mail of a terrible warrior. Each thigh was a ton of meat, ivory and steel mesh, and from the great breathing cage of the upper body, those two delicate arms dangled out front, arms with hands which might pick up and examine men like toys, while the snake neck coiled, and the head itself, a ton of sculptured stone, lifted easily upon the sky. Its mouth gaped, exposing a fence of teeth like daggers. Its eyes rolled, ostrich eggs, empty of all expression save hunger. It closed its mouth in a death grin. It ran, its pelvic bones crushing aside trees and bushes, its taloned feet clawing damp earth, leaving prints 6 inches deep wherever it settled its weight.
Joking.
It ran with a gliding ballet step, far too poised and balanced for its 10 tons.
Let's take it.
It moved into a sunlit arena warily, its beautiful reptile hands feeling the air. My God! Eccles twitched his mouth. It could reach up and grab the moon. Shh! Travis jerked angrily. He hasn't seen us yet. It can't be killed. Eccles pronounced this verdict quietly, as if there could be no argument.
I really didn't mean to buy
He had weighed
truck.
the evidence, and this was his considered opinion. The rifle in his hands seemed a cap gun. We were fools to come. This is impossible.
Nice
Shut up, hissed Travis.
Is it a sleeper?
Nightmare. Turn around,
doesn't look like it, does it?
Commanded Travis. Walk quietly to the machine. We'll remit 1/2 your fee. I didn't realize it would be this big, said Eccles. I miscalculated, that's all. And now I want out. It sees us. There's the red paint on its chest. The thunder lizard raised itself. Its armored flesh glittered like 1,000 green coins. The coins, crusted with slime, steamed.
In
the slime, tiny insects wriggled, so that the entire body seemed to twitch and undulate, even while the monster itself did not move. It exhaled. The stink of raw flesh blew down the wilderness. Get me out of here, said Eccles. It was never like this before. I was always sure I'd come through alive. I had good guides, good safaris, and safety. This time I figured wrong. I've met my match and admit it. This is too much for me to get hold of. Don't run, said Lesperance. Turn around. Hide in the machine. Yes. Eccles seemed to be numb. He looked at his feet as if trying to make them move. He gave a grunt of helplessness. Eccles! He took a few steps, blinking, shuffling. Not that way! The monster, at the first motion, lunged forward with a terrible scream. It covered 100 yards in 4 seconds. The rifles jerked up and blazed fire. A windstorm from the beast's mouth engulfed them in the stench of slime and old blood. The monster roared, teeth glittering with sun. Eccles, not looking back, walked blindly to the edge of the path. His gun limp in his arms, stepped off the path,
put my foot down fully
and walked,
now.
not knowing it, in the jungle. His feet sank into green moss. His legs moved him, and he felt alone and remote from the events behind. The rifles cracked again. Their sound was lost in shriek and lizard thunder. The great lever of the reptile's tail swung up, lashed sideways. Trees exploded in clouds of leaf and branch. The monster twitched its jeweler's hands down to fondle at the men, to twist them in half, to crush them like berries, to cram them into its teeth and its screaming throat. Its boulder stone eyes leveled with the men. They saw themselves mirrored. They fired at the metallic eyelids and the blazing black iris. Like a stone idol, like a mountain avalanche, Tyrannosaurus fell, pulled them with it. It wrenched and tore the metal path. The men flung themselves back and away. The body hit, 10 tons of cold flesh and stone. The guns fired. The monster lashed its armored tail, twitched its snake jaws, and lay still. A fount of blood spurted from its throat. Somewhere inside, a sack of fluids burst.
That could have been very nasty.
Sickening gushes drenched the hunters. They stood, red and glistening. The thunder faded. The jungle was silent. After the avalanche,
I think that right away would be given to this main road that I'm on, that's passing through town.
Billings and Kramer sat on the pathway
it slows things down,
and threw up. Travis and Lesperance stood with smoking rifles, cursing steadily. In the time machine, on his face, Eccles lay shivering. He had found his way back to the path, climbed into the machine. Travis came walking, glanced at Eccles, took cotton gauze from a metal box, and returned to the others, who were sitting on the path. Clean up. They wiped the blood from their helmets. They began to curse too. The monster lay, a hill of solid flesh. Within, you could hear the sighs and murmurs as the furthest chambers of it died. The organs malfunctioning, liquids running a final instant from pocket to sac to spleen. Everything shutting off, closing up forever. It was like standing by a wrecked locomotive or a steam shovel at quitting time. All valves being released or levered tight. Bones cracked, the tonnage of its own flesh.
I believe it's down to 20 now. We've come out of town.
Snapped the delicate forearms, caught underneath. The meat settled, quivering. Another cracking sound. Overhead, a gigantic tree branch broke from its heavy mooring, fell. It crashed upon the dead beast with finality. There! Lesperance checked his watch. Right on time. That's the giant tree that was scheduled to fall and kill this animal originally.
Huge mountain. It looks so realistic, doesn't it?
You want the trophy picture? What? We can't take a trophy back to the future. The body has to stay right here where it would have died originally, so the insects, birds, and bacteria can get at it as they were intended to. Everything in balance. The body stays, but we can take a picture of you standing near it. The two men tried to think, but gave up, shaking their heads. They let themselves be led along the metal path. They sank wearily into the machine cushions. They gazed back at the ruined monster, the stagnating mound, where already strange reptilian birds and golden insects were busy at the steaming armor. A sound on the floor of the time machine stiffened them. Eccles sat there, shivering. "I'm sorry," he said at last. "Get up," cried Travis. Eccles got up. "Go out on that path alone," said Travis. He had his rifle pointed. "You're not coming back in the machine. We're leaving you here." Lesperin seized Travis's arm. Wait! Stay out of this! Travis shook his hand away. This son of a bitch nearly killed us. But it isn't that so much. Hell no. Look at his shoes. Look at them. He ran off the path. My God, that ruins us. Christ knows how much we'll forfeit. Tens of thousands of dollars of insurance. We guarantee no one leaves the path. He left it. Oh, the damn fool. I'll have to report to the government. They might revoke our license to travel. God knows what he's done to time. To history. Take it easy. All he did was kick up some dirt. How do we know? Cried Travis. We don't know anything. It's all a damn mystery. Get out there, Eccles. Eccles fumbled his shirt. I'll pay anything. $100,000. Travis glared at Eccles' checkbook and spat. Go out there. The monster's next to the path. Stick your arms up to your elbows in his mouth. Then you can come back with us. That's unreasonable. The monster's dead, you yellow bastard. The bullets can't be left behind. They don't belong in the past. They might change something. Here's my knife. Dig them out. The jungle was alive again, full of the old tremorings and bird cries. Eccles turned slowly to regard that primeval garbage dump, that hill of nightmares and terror. After a long time, like a sleepwalker, he shuffled out along the path. He returned, shuddering, 5 minutes later, his arms soaked and red to the elbows.
You don't need to press A when
he
you do
held
that.
out his hands.
I didn't realize.
Each held a number of steel bullets. Then he fell. He lay where he fell, not moving. You didn't have to make him do that, said Lesperance. Didn't I? It's too early to tell. Travis nudged the still body. He'll live. Next time he won't go hunting game like this. Okay. He jerked his thumb wearily at Lesperance. Switch on. Let's go home. 1492, 1776, 1812. They cleaned their hands and faces. They changed their caking shirts and pants. Eccles was up and around again, not speaking. Travis glared at him for a full 10 minutes. Don't look at me, cried Eccles. I haven't done anything. Who can tell? Just ran off the path, that's all. A little mud on my shoes. What do you want me to do? Get down and pray? We might need it. I'm warning you, Eccles. I might kill you yet. I've got my gun ready. I'm innocent. I've done nothing. 1999, 2000, 2055. The machine stopped. Get out, said Travis. The room was there as they had left it, but not the same as they had left it. The same man sat behind the same desk, but the same man did not quite sit behind the same desk. Travis looked around swiftly. Everything okay here? He snapped. Fine. Welcome home. Travis did not relax. He seemed to be looking at the very atoms of the air itself, at the way the sun poured through the one high window. Okay, Eccles, get out. Don't ever come back. Eccles could not move. You heard me, said Travis. What are you staring at? Eccles stood smelling of the air, and there was a thing to the air, a chemical taint so subtle, so slight, that only a faint cry of his subliminal senses warned him it was there. The colors, white, gray, blue, orange, in the wall, in the furniture, in the sky beyond the window, were, and there was a feel. His flesh twitched. His hands twitched. He stood drinking the oddness with the pores of his body. Somewhere, someone must have been screaming one of those whistles that only a dog can hear. His body screamed silence in return.
Oh, that was a surreal
Beyond this room, beyond this wall, beyond this man who was not quite the same man, seated at this desk that was not quite the same desk, lay an entire world of streets and people. What sort of world it was now, there was no telling. He could feel them moving there, beyond the walls, almost, like so many chess pieces blown in a dry wind. But the immediate thing was the sign painted on the office wall. The same sign he had read earlier today on first entering. Somehow,
weird conversation now.
The sign had changed.
About
Time
elves.
Safari Inc. Safaris to any year in the past. You name the animal, we take you there, you shoot it. Eccles felt himself fall into a chair. He fumbled crazily at the thick slime on his boots. He held up a clod of dirt, trembling. No, it can't be. Not a little thing like that. No. Embedded in the mud, glistening green and gold and black, was a butterfly. Very beautiful and very dead. Not a little thing like that! Not a butterfly! Cried Eccles. It fell to the floor, an exquisite thing. A small thing that could upset balances and knock down a line of small dominoes, and then big dominoes, and then gigantic dominoes, all down the years across time. Eccles' mind whirled. It couldn't change things. Killing one butterfly couldn't be that important. Could it?
The butterfly
His face was cold. His mouth trembled, asking, Who won the presidential election yesterday? The man behind the desk laughed. You joking? You know damn well. Deutsche, of course. Who else? Not that damn weakling Keith. We got an Iron Man now. A man with guts, by God. The official stopped. What's wrong? Eccles moaned. He dropped to his knees. He scrabbled at the golden butterfly with shaking fingers. Can't we? He pleaded to the world, to himself, to the officials, to the machine. Can't we take it back? Can't we make it alive again? Can't we start over? Can't we? He did not move. Eyes shut, he waited, shivering. He heard Travis breathe loud in the room. He heard Travis shift his rifle, click the safety catch, and raise the weapon. There was a sound of thunder. For more audiobook narrations and classroom literature, subscribe to the channel.
So that was a bit cool. I mean, that was like the butterfly effect. It was okay. I mean, you know, I think the thing is this sort of stuff is quite old, isn't it? I'm gonna mark that as having listened to it though, but yeah, I don't know. Would I keep it? I mean, this came recommended to me sort of 6 months ago. All these Ray Bradbury stuff, so I don't know. Let's do a bit of Alan Watts for 10 minutes.
Supposing that I say to you, each one of you is really the great self. And you say, well, all you've said up till now makes me fairly sympathetic to this intellectually. But I don't really feel it. What must I do to feel it really? My answer to you is this. You ask me that question because you don't want to feel it really. You're frightened of it. And therefore, what you're going to do is you're going to get a method of practice so that you can put it off. So that I can say, well, I can be a long time on the way getting this thing. And then maybe I'll be worthy of it after I have suffered enough. See, because we are brought up in a social scheme whereby we have to deserve what we get. And the price that one pays for all good things is suffering. But all of that is precisely postponement. Because one is afraid here and now to see it. If you had the nerve, you know, real nerve, you would see it right away. Only that would be, you know, when one feels you shouldn't have nerve like that. Why, that would be awful. That would be, that wouldn't do at all. Because after all, I'm supposed to be poor little me. And I'm not really much of a muchness. And I'm playing the role of being poor little me. And therefore, in order to be something great, like a Buddha or a Jivan Mukta, one liberated in this life, I ought to suffer for it. So you can suffer for it. There are all kinds of ways invented for you to do this. And you can discipline yourself, and you can gain control of your mind, and you can do all sorts of extraordinary things. I mean, you can drink water in through your rectum and do the most fantastic things.
What?
But that's just like being able to run the 100 yards in 9 seconds, or any other kind of accomplishment you want to engage in. There's absolutely nothing to do with the realization of the self. The realization of the self fundamentally depends on coming off it. You know, the sort of, when we say to people who put on some kind of an act, we say, oh, come off it. And some people can come off it. They laugh and say they suddenly realize, you know, they were making fools of themselves, and they laugh at themselves and they come off it. So in exactly the same way, the guru, the teacher, is trying to make you come off it. Now, if he finds he can't make you come off it, he's going to put you through all these exercises, so that you'll, at the last time, when you've got enough discipline, enough suffering, and enough frustration, you'll give it all up and realize you were there for the beginning and there was nothing to realize.
So this tremendous schizophrenia in human beings of thinking that they are rider and horse, soul in command of body, or will in command of passions, wrestling with them, all that kind of split thinking simply aggravates the problem. And we get more and more split. And so we have all sorts of people engaged in an interior conflict which they will never resolve, because the true self, either you know it or you don't. If you do know it, then you know it's the only one, and the other, so-called lower self, just ceases to be a problem. It becomes something like a mirage, and you don't go around hitting at mirages with a stick or trying to put reins on them. You just know that they're mirages and walk straight through them. And so that split is implanted in us all. And because of our being split-minded, we are always dithering. Is the choice that I am about to make of the higher self or of the lower self? Is it of the spirit or is it of the flesh? Is the word that I have received of the Lord or is it of the devil? And nobody can decide. Because if you knew how to choose, you wouldn't have to. In the so-called moral rearmament movement, you test your messages that you get from God in your quiet time by comparing them with standards of absolute honesty, absolute purity, absolute love, and so on. But of course, if you knew what those things were, you wouldn't have to test. You would know immediately. And do you know what those things are? The more one thinks about the question, what would absolute love be? Supposing I could set myself the ideal of being absolutely loving to everybody, what would that imply in terms of conduct? Well, you could think about that till all is blue, because you could never get to the answer. The problems of life are so subtle that to try to solve them with vague principles, as if those vague principles were specific instructions, is completely impossible. It is important to overcome split-mindedness, but what is the way? Where can you start from if you're already split? A Taoist saying is that when the wrong man uses the right means, the right means work in the wrong way. So what are you to do? How can you get off it and get moving? If I say to you, good morning, you say, good morning. Nice day, isn't it? Yes. Or if I hit you, boom, you say, ouch. And you don't stop to hesitate to give these answers and these responses. You don't think about it when I say good morning.
There's a warehouse.
So in exactly the same way, that kind of response, which doesn't have to be a deliberate response, a response of a no deliberating mind, is a response of a Buddha mind or an unattached mind. But you must not imagine that this is necessarily a quick response. Because if you get hung up on the idea of responding quickly, the idea of quickness will be itself a form of obstruction. When you are perfectly free to feel stuck or not stuck, then you're unstuck. Because actually, nothing can stick on the real mind, and you will find this out if you watch the flow of your thoughts. And those thoughts arise and go like waves on the water. All the time, they come and go. And when they go, they are as if they had never been here. There is process. There is the flow of thought. And the flow of thought doesn't have to happen to anyone.
Okay, got another trailer to pick up now.
Does not have to beat upon an experiencer.
That one over there.
There is all the time simply the one stream going on.
And it's going all the way to...
And we are convinced that we stand aside from it and observe it.
Ultraborg?
Because we've been brought up that way.
Ultraborg.
It's very important to get rid of that illusion of duality between the thinker and the thought. So find out who is the thinker behind the thoughts. Who is the real, genuine you?
Let's do it. There's a neat little bit of reversing, I thought. Still not confident reversing. There's good visibility in this cab. I'm still not confident reversing with a trailer whilst just in the cab view, though. God knows how people do that in real life. Well, that was a brief bit of Alan Watts. If I had Desert Island Discs, I think it'd just be Alan Watts. That's why if I had to be like a huge Alan Watts compilation, which I've tried to do actually. I've tried to collect a load of his stuff, but it's very difficult because you end up with duplicates. And yeah, I just don't want a collection of duplicate stuff. I'd rather just buy a compilation CD of like these, you know what I mean, like 8 discs of Alan Watts. Do you know what I mean? And then it's just like, yeah, these are his lectures. I'd rather have gone to one of his lectures. God. I'm taking this to Ultraborg. This trailer on me. I didn't think I was facing southbound. Oh, I was at a different place to when I usually was. But okay, so I'm going southbound to Ultraborg. Drop this off. tyres on this truck are okay. I mean, we've not driven a huge distance, but we have driven some decent mileage. Just towing this trailer without a problem anyway. It towed the other one without much of an issue. It looks like it's a light truck. It's okay. Brakes well. Brakes are superb on this thing actually. Might just be because there's fresh tyres on it. Turning right where you really have to swing out into the road. This is it. This is Ultrabug. Weird. A lot of this place is very flat, and then just hills that are inaccessible in the distance. But it's not very, you know what I mean? There's not much of a, like, whatever the word is, relief to the land. This is a nice truck actually. I like this one. I like the visibility of the screen and the big mirror. Though it doesn't have one of those little mirrors at the bottom. But then again, the other truck, I couldn't even see into that. So it was like, what's the point of having it if you can't see it? Oh, is it here? Yeah, it must be. I thought you said this one was going for export. I could be wrong. Definitely, I'm obviously wrong because this is like delivering it straight to the construction site. Okay, well, I've obviously missed something. Oh, is he letting me out? That's very kind. Let's just make sure that trailer doesn't clip that fence. Okay, it's not in here, is it? Oh, bloody hell. Good job this isn't a timed one. Where the hell? I can get out there, can't I? So let's do that. Just drive around this park car. That's weird. Why am I doing that? When I'm tired, my verbal processing is diminishing. Park. That's so weird. I'm worried about it, if I'm honest. So I feel like a stroke victim to some of the things I've come out with. I shouldn't say that. I don't mean it in a bad way, saying that. Oh my god. I'm gonna have to reverse this in, aren't I? God's sake. Always does this to me. Anything about reversing trailers like this. This will be an interesting one. There's no way I could do this in the cab view. Just no way. Right. Oh, damn it. A banksman out here to help out. That'll do. £800, and I you know what I mean. I was earning like 1,200 in the other place, and just doing one job in like half that distance as well. Let's see what else to say. It's just bullshit as far as I'm concerned. Oh, a little extra. Yeah, there's not that much extra. I mean, sound rude about the elf thing. That's fine. I was not offended. We should have been, you freak. Right. Let's get back out onto the main road. Get some fuel and get some sleep. I think both, oh my god, look at that. Both in-game and IRL as well, I think. It's time for the shipping forecast issued by the Met Office on behalf of the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency. Here is the general synopsis at 0700 GMT this morning. Cow in sea area Shannon moving slowly eastwards and filling. Sorry, that should read low in sea area Shannon. And now the area reports. Viking north at Sierra, south at Sierra, east at Sierra, west at Sierra, southwest at Sierra, and north-northeast at Sierra. Wind southwest, rain at times, good. 40s, 50s, 60s, Tyne, Dogger, German bite, French kiss and Swiss roll. Westerly becoming cyclonic, good. Humber, Thames, Bedford, Leyland Dab, Dover, Sole, Hake, Halibut and Blobfish, regular praise, rain at times, good. White, Portland, Plymouth, Ginger Rogers in Finisterre, light flatulence, some rain, Very good. Lundy, Fundy, Sunday and Monday. Wind southwest becoming cyclonic. Bloody marvellous. Rockall, Soddle wind, heavy showers. Absolutely incredible. Marlin, Hebrides, Bailey, Fair Isle, Cardigan, Pullover and southeast Iceland. Wind, southeast, rain at times, slightly disappointing. And now the reports for the coastal stations. Tiree, wind northwest 7 miles at 1004, rising slowly. Butt of Lewis, north 5 miles 1006, falling. Wolverhampton, northwest as far as the Ring Road 998, rising slowly. Norway, Nilpois. That was the shipping forecast as written by Les Parker. Right, there we go. Let's get those off. And oh, I can't sleep because I've lost the and then the shipping forecast to send us to sleep nicely. This has been a love affair, not with Truck Driver, but with Radio 4 for me. It's wonderful. Oh, God. Oh, excuse me. It's quite nice just sitting here, listening to the rain. Too tired for Tourist Bus Simulator, even though it's probably downloaded now. Oh well. Right, I'm going to say goodnight. Cheerio. Thanks for watching. Really appreciate it. And I'll catch you another time. I hope you've enjoyed this DLC. Take it easy.